everything that everybody got to say, but I don't believe nothing that nobody says. If I feel that it's bullshit, I'm gonna question you on it. And if you don't know what you're fucking talking about when I question you on it, you're gonna get mad. It is what it is. When the truth is in you, to know it, not to be believed in some bullshit that was taught to you. So,
the earliest religions date at least to 40,000 BC. Now, actually, we have evidence that goes even further back than that. But by 40,000 BC, we have shamanistic cave paintings and other things like ritual burials and things like that indicate that there was some sort of religion going on. 40,000 years BC, think about that. Now, the first priesthoods were looking at 10,000 BC, when we have cities, or cities and villages and things, where we have actual priesthoods established. So you've got 30,000 years where humans are walking around with religions, having religious beliefs, before they even get priesthoods. But then, finally, they get priesthoods. It's still 8,000 years before Yahweh comes along and says, oh, hey, by the way, I am the one true God. And you see, of course, he does this in one tiny little place. I mean, he doesn't mention the fact that he exists to anyone but one tiny tribe of goat herders in one little place. No. And for another 1,000 years, even after that, he neglects to ever mention this Jesus character, right? Stupid. So when you look at history,
we worse than
this Yahweh religion, this Yahweh
we are fucking worse than
Christianity just looks like one among many. It makes no sense from the perspective of a cosmic deity,
like
who would, of course, been revealing the gospel from year 40,000 BC. And all cultures, all history would show that the same God was sending the same messages to people in every culture and everywhere, from as far back as we have any kind of evidence of religion.
For you,
written records go back
being with you
2000
at all times.
No,
and what makes it so divine is the Creator will never control your mind or take away your life, free will, or your choices.
Right? If there was
you
any
can think about whatever the fuck you want to think about, but doing it is a whole
message, the same,
totally different
belief
fucking
system.
thing.
But that's not what we see. What we see looks pretty much like human invention. Humans are making stuff up according to their local culture and happenstance of history. Now we skip up to look at Judaism. So we're going to start with Judaism because that's the first of the Western religions that's still around and has influenced the other major two. Now, in between 539 and 332 BC, Persia conquered Judea. Now, I want to point out, of course, that those of you who know geography, you can try to find Judea on there, the Palestine, the Holy Land, quote unquote. It barely shows up. I mean, it's basically almost just a piece of a red line of the border there. And compare that, of course, to the Persian Empire. Looks like the Persians had better gods, apparently.
That bullshit. All this shit was man-made up bullshit
the Persians,
to control us by what we believe in and what we fear. I'm letting y'all hear this shit for y'all fucking self. Because all y'all know is what's been taught to you to know. Y'all don't know the inner of you being here because y'all too fucking stuck on fucking stupid. Believing in this bullshit that was taught to you as fucking kids.
Basically the god system of this incredibly, enormously powerful empire that easily conquered them. And they said, well, they can't have a better god than we do, so we better get some of these cool god attributes pretty quick. And so they borrowed a lot of the ideas that the Zoroastrians had and added them to their religion. These are attributes of Judaism that did not exist before the exile. You won't find them in the Old Testament writings that were written before the Persian conquest. But afterwards, then you start to see it happening all throughout. This idea, first of all, of a war of a good god versus an evil god, of light versus dark, that was a Zoroastrian idea. The Jews did not have that. Before the Persian conquest, Satan was actually one of the right-hand men of God and was doing the will of God. So when Satan goes down to cause evil, he was doing it on orders from God. He's not an adversary in the sense of the enemy of God.
Once again, all that shit is man-made up motherfucking bullshit, because one thing about the divine creator that loves unconditionally, the truth is the truth, and it's just this. Why in the fuck would the creator create a fucking hell for the creations that it created all out of nothing? So when you think about you being created all out of nothing, something is in you giving you life, giving you free will, fighting against all the bullshit that's on the outside of you trying to get in. We've been taught to be fucking stupid. We've been taught to believe in bullshit. starting off with that Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, and the Tooth Fairy, leading up to you getting on your fucking knees and taking the father out the house and throwing the father in the fucking air. That's some fucked up, controlling bullshit, man.
This is the future heavenly paradise kind of thing. That comes from Zoroastrianism. That wasn't originally a Jewish belief. And the idea then, the most crucially, that all the good people will be resurrected by God to live in that new world happily ever after. This idea of an eternal paradise life was not a part of Judaism before. When you died, you just died and stayed dead, basically. You were kind of like a vague spirit in the earth. They didn't have an idea of an eternal paradise
bullshit
or an eternal afterlife. But the Jews picked that up from the Zoroastrians, and it became a fundamental requirement of Judaism. Now, when you look at the Talmud, one of the requirements of being a Jew is affirming that you will be resurrected. Everyone else is explicitly declared a heretic in the Talmud. And yet, that wasn't a Jewish belief. That was an Iranian belief picked up from the Persian cult of Zoroastrianism. So when you look at this, you realize that this is just man-made religion, right? This is not a single God who thought of all this stuff at the origin point of Judaism. There was no, you look at when God's communicating with Abraham in the Bible, he doesn't say, oh, by the way, the world is going to end at a certain time. I'm going to...
Are y'all getting to understand, understand? Are y'all getting this? It's bullshit. The creativity in you is the creator of you. That God and that Jesus bullshit is a lie that was told to you as a child for you to believe in so you can be controlled by what you fear and believe in. Being bullshit. So you could be a stupid, bullshitted ass, stupid, bullshit person doing stupid shit and laughing about it because you didn't know that it was bullshit, because you was taught that it was okay to do it and it's funny to do it. Boy, we've been fucked clean the fuck over, and I'm talking about all motherfucking people except for the motherfucking rich motherfuckers that's telling their motherfucking children the truth and shit. Man.
Shall be the plague whereby Jehovah will smite all the peoples that have warred against Jerusalem. Their flesh shall rot away while they stand upon their feet, and their eyes shall rot away in their sockets, and their tongue shall rot away in their mouth. That's, by the way, where Steven Spielberg got the idea for Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Go back to that
Bible, because they can't possibly be a supernatural deity communicating to these prophets if they get things wrong.
Come on.
And it's also pretty horrific here. And this shall be the plague, I'm going to read. This shall be the plague whereby Jehovah will smite all the peoples that have warred against Jerusalem.
The fucking God and Jesus bullshit that you were taught to believe in.
Rot away in their sockets, and their tongue shall rot away in their mouth.
What you believe in as being the loving, unconditional creator was created for them to do to some other people and shit?
And the second plague shall befall the horse, the mule, the camel, the ass, and all the beasts that shall be in their camps. What do the animals do?
Thank you. Fuck, but these some stupid fucking people.
And it shall come to pass that anyone that is left of all the nations that came against Jerusalem shall go up from year to year to worship the King, Jehovah of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. And it shall be that whoever of all the families of the earth does not go up to Jerusalem, that's all the families of the earth, if they do not go up to Jerusalem to worship the King Jehovah of hosts, upon them there shall be no rain. If the family of Egypt even,
all they really saying is,
shall rain be upon them.
These motherfuckers
plague too,
already knew
by Jehovah will smite
they
the
was creating technology the way that they wanted to.
This shall be the punishment of all the nations that go not up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. Never happened. Failed prediction. But notice this idea of the apocalyptic end world, and also the idea of the Jews as the master race that the entire world will bow down to. They kept getting conquered instead by other nations like the Persians, the Greeks, and then the Romans.
Because they always wanted to rule something.
Exactly the opposite the way that God told them it would. And this, we see, even is connected to...
It go to show you the motherfucker that's trying to rule as the people of God, they bullshit. Don't even know the divine creator of all love, the real shit. We've been taught to be stupid fucking sheep.
So the passage that's behind there is a passage about how God's going to burn everything up, and there's a funny line in it in Malachi 4:1-3. Those who have mobile devices can look this up. And what he says there is that the Jews
and everybody keeps saying
will be able to gamble as calves.
Let you know something for yourself for a fucking change, stupid fucking sheeple ass
of their enemies. And
the Creator is neither man nor woman, black nor white, nobody's mama, nobody's dad. The Creator.
Okay,
how can the creation give the Creator a fucking name? Stop being fucking stupid.
Oh, right. Yeah. So that's Judaism. And you could go on and on about that, but the point is, it's very easy to look at historical facts and show that it's a man-made religion. It doesn't have a pipeline to God. So it's not.
It doesn't have a pipeline to the Creator.
That is probably not true. But let's look at Christianity. Christianity originated as a Jewish sect, and what they did is the original Christians, they took Judaism and they took this other faction going on all around them and combined them to create a new version of Judaism, a sort of super Judaism.
So you can be stupid in the middle of both of them, not knowing which one the motherfucking choose, because you're stupid to the shit that they taught you to believe in.
Different by incorporating this foreign culture.
I was stupid too.
This is exactly what the
I was stupid just like you.
Exactly what the Jews
That's
did.
why I ended up giving up on life and shit, because I didn't know what the fucking truth was. Now I do.
Around
I'm
them,
straight.
held by their conquerors, the Greeks and then the Romans, and created a new religion. And some of the gods that they're...
And you heard that, boy. Some of the gods. Y'all got buku different fucking gods to fucking believe in, because you was taught to be fucking stupid to believe in Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, and the Tooth Fairy, to get older to be told that it was a lie. What the fuck are you lying the fuck for? Some motherfuckers say that we saved the Christmas shit to give the kids some type of inspiration. How the fuck can you give a kid some inspiration from a lie? That's how the kids end up being liars, like they fucking lying ass fucking people that lied to them from the
to the lower world, into what we would call hell, is stripped naked, put on trial in a kangaroo court, is stricken dead by a death spell, and then nailed up, basically crucified.
Because the truth
and then her
is the
minions
truth.
come down and feed her the food of water and life.
We had
3
to take
days later,
that shit
she's
in and believe that
resurrected
shit,
and ascends to
even
glory.
though it didn't make
Sounds
sense.
like a similar
That was
we've
the
heard
stupid
before, right?
part.
But it gets repeated again and again and again in all these other gods, each time transformed. All of these stories of all of these gods are completely different from each other, but have the same similar structure behind them. And the ones that Christians would most be aware of are Romulus, for example. Roman state god, his death and resurrection was celebrated in annual passion plays, actually called passion plays. They were actually acted out, the death and resurrection of Romulus every year. It was a Roman state religion. Osiris, Egyptian god. Those baptized, yes, baptized, into his death and resurrection are saved in the afterlife. Sound familiar? Zalmoxis is a Thracian, possibly Celtic god. His death and resurrection assures followers of eternal life as well. Zalmoxis was in Herodotus. Their cult is described in Herodotus, and Herodotus was one of the main school texts that would be used to teach how to write for advanced writers who are writing at the level of the writers we see in the New Testament, who are writing in Greek, which means we can be absolutely certain that the authors of the Gospels read Herodotus, because everybody read Herodotus if you learned how to write Greek that well. And therefore they would know about Zalmoxis. It would not be a coincidence. And of course, Egypt is right next to the Holy Land, quote unquote. Therefore, Osiris would be well known to them. And of course, they were conquered by the Romans, so they would be familiar with Roman ceremonies as well.
If something is complicated
but I want to learn, some of the gods that you hear on the internet and so forth as being dying and rising gods were not, in fact.
It's something that you don't need to learn.
Common ones that you'll hear about.
I didn't learn how to read and write. Now to know the reason why I didn't learn how to read and write comes from the divine creator of
through which he acquires
the creation that created that bullshit.
With his followers who are
I didn't read or write.
So there is a very
I didn't learn
similarity is still there.
Simply because it wasn't
all the
straight.
Gospels of Mithras were destroyed.
It was to the right, it was to the left. You had to choose one.
Closest thing we have hints
so the
and
truth
quotations
don't always
and
be one
suggestions and
way.
descriptions in various places,
All
various
day.
texts.
Every
but no
day.
complete gospel.
Coming
And this
from
is the
the
only one we
divine
have. It's
creator
actually
of
the picture
everyone.
Bible version. This is a comic book,
Love.
essentially, of
Never
the
hate.
story of Mithras from beginning to end.
Why, when the creator is all creation of all good,
But
it's
the thing is,
creation.
this is like having a picture Bible without
We the
having
only
text in
ones
the Bible,
that
so we don't
do
actually know what's going on in each scene.
everything
We don't really have
against
the description.
what's being done
But nevertheless,
in
we can
nature.
kind of make certain inferences.
The
about what's
animals
going
do
on.
exactly
This is
what
the
they're
closest we
supposed
get
to
the
do
Gospel of Mithras,
within
stone,
the magnetic
comic book,
rotational
in a sense.
pull of this planet.
But what all these gods do have in common, including Mithras
And the creator that created it.
they're all savior
We
gods.
are the ones
They're all
that's
the son
going
of
all
God,
against the
or daughter
motherfucking
God,
grain
some
of
them
the
are
truth
women.
being in
They
us.
all undergo a passion.
Because we was taught to believe
using the exact
that
same
some
word, by the way, which
bullshit
means suffering
was
or
on the
struggle.
outside of us in the
They all
fucking
obtain victory
sky.
over death, which they share with their
Do you
followers.
work
They
by
all do
remote
this with
control?
some form of baptism or
I know I
communion or
don't.
both. And they all predate
The creator
Christianity.
gives me and you.
So what we're
life.
looking at here is just like the Zoroastrian scenario. All
Free
of this
will.
whole structural idea was borrowed
And
and
all
added
the
onto
choices
Judaism, and what you do when you take these elements and
think
add them onto Judaism is what you get is Christianity,
and do.
right? So once
Whatever
again, we
you
see a
want to do.
man-made thing. And it wasn't a case
But
where,
that
like, to have
magnetic
Abraham,
rotation
God
of
revealed in
pull
the Old Testament
that
that there's
pulls
going to
you
be
from
Jesus
today
figure,
to be
and
in
if you have
tomorrow
faith, you're going to be resurrected and all of this
is
stuff.
divine
This stuff
as
doesn't
the
appear
time
until
that you're in
coincidentally
right now.
when the Jews
Because
are
ain't
conquered by
nobody
a nation that
promised
has religions
tomorrow.
that have these
You
elements.
can die right
So it
now.
looks like man-made, not
So start thinking for yourself for
So
a change.
Christianity is just like
And then you're going to start being in tune with the divine creator of all.
Let's talk about evil.
But this
So
bullshit
I'm
that
going
they
to move on
done taught to us to
into a
believe in
different
as
period of
children,
history.
kind of let go of that
another broad
motherfucking
scope of
bullshit that
history,
they
let's
taught
put it
to
that way.
believe in as children.
But let's
Because you're not a
start with,
motherfucking
Epicurus,
child,
so,
you're a motherfucking
given
boy.
that famous line.
The creator is in you
Is God
creating your
willing to stop
reality
evil
for
but
you.
unable?
But
Then he
you
is not
gotta know
powerful.
what the fuck
Is he
to
able
do.
but unwilling? Then he is not good.
Because if you constantly
Is he both
believe
able
in this
and willing?
bullshit that was taught
Then
to
how can there
us,
be evil? Is he
you're going to
neither
still be
able nor
waiting for
willing? Then
God
why
to
call
be
him
coming
God?
out some fucking sky and
That was
Jesus coming
Epicurus,
back to save you.
and as this meme says,
That's
atheists
bullshit
winning
that
the
was taught
argument
to
since
us.
300 BC.
So we can be
There's
controlled by
never really
what we
been
believe in and
a
what we
good
fear.
answer to this.
And most of y'all fear death.
We'll give one example.
And I'll tell
Slavery.
y'all something so y'all know for yourself.
This photograph.
Why
I don't
do
know
you
if
fear
you've
death?
seen this before. It's quite
Those
famous.
of you who fear
This
death,
was taken after the
I'm going
Civil
to give you a
War,
little
when
reason
slaves
why
were
you
freed in
fear
America,
death.
and
Because 9
this
times
fellow
out of
wanted
10,
his
9 times
wounds
out of
to be
10, you're doing
photographed
some
and preserved for
bullshit that
memory
might
and
cause
disseminated
your
so that
death.
people would see the
And
incredible
you ain't
cruelty,
living the
that
truth.
American slavery
You're
involved.
living
These are Bible
bullshit.
thumping people, right?
Because
These are people
why
who
be
think the
afraid
Bible
of
is-
something
is
that's going to
legit.
happen? You just
They
don't know
did
when.
this. They did this to him.
I died 4 times.
And
You know
this
what
is
I'm
appalling.
talking
How
about.
could any
Not
God
be
stand by
believing
and watch
no
this
bullshit.
happening, much less watch it happening being done in His
What I'm
name, with
tripping
people
off,
citing His book, worshiping
How
Him, His
much
actual
we
worshippers,
holding
His
on to
actual
a
followers,
lie.
without
How
saying a
much
word.
we spreading the lie
It's
to our
unbelievable.
children.
So what is the
Seeing that the
probability
lie
that a benevolent
hasn't
God
done
would
nothing
have a valid excuse not
but
to say
fucked
one
up
heavenly word,
everything
heavenly word,
because
heavenly
it's a
word
lie.
about this ever in the whole of history?
Look at all
Even
the
worse
different
in
gods.
the
Look
time
at all the
of
different
American
religions. Look at
slavery.
y'all talking about this
And what
religion
evidence
is
do you
better
have
than that
supporting
religion,
that
but all
probability? If you're going
the
to make up some
motherfuckers
excuse,
compete.
how likely is it, and what is
We
what are
was
you
taught to
assuming?
be
What are you basing
stupid
that
to
estimate on?
compete against
Those are the
each other.
questions you would ask. But in reality, from our background knowledge of benevolent beings, because we know lots of benevolent beings, they're called humans. These humans who happen to be nice people, or among the nice humans anyway, nice humans with the power to speak unharmed, who don't have to fear anything. I mean, if you're God, you're like Superman, you're invincible, you can't have your head cut off, you can't be shot, you can't be burned, there isn't anything they can do to punish you, you can't have your job taken away, whatever it is. If you have no limitations on you that will prevent you from speaking, and you're a nice person, you have no valid excuse not to say anything. In fact, when we look at people, all the examples of other benevolent beings who are in the position of having the power to speak unharmed, a valid excuse not to speak is so rare we never see one instance of it.
No.
And the word rare, by the way, means very infrequent, which happens to mean very improbable. And in fact, it's got to be at least millions to one against, because we know millions of benevolent people who are in this position who are vocally saying, condemning this kind of thing. If God is not doing it, then whatever excuse he has to be rarer than millions to one against.
No. Bullshit.
So that's one way to look at it. And of course, you know many other ways to design that argument in terms of pointing out that the excuses just don't hold up. All they do is make your more improbable rather than saving it.
Bullshit.
But I'm going to turn something around altogether. You've probably heard the philosophical moral argument, right? The morals only come from God. People believe there are morals, therefore God must exist, because where else would morals come from? Well, let's look at history. History actually refutes this.
No.
Let's treat atheism and theism as two different theories here. Atheism, as a theory, predicts that moral rules will only come from human beings, they will begin deeply flawed, and will be improved by experiment over thousands of years.
No.
No, that is exactly what we observe.
Thank
Slavery
you.
is just one example of
Makes
many
sense.
things where the moral rules were created by humans.
Makes
They
sense.
were deeply flawed.
Makes
completely
sense.
fucked up, one would
Makes
say.
sense, because as soon as we fucked up,
And we're
we start eating the fucking
gradually
animals.
very painful.
That's when we fucked up.
Over thousands
We start
of
eating
years.
animals.
Therefore, atheism is vindicated by the historical record. Theism, as a theory, however, predicts a universe correctly governed morally right from the start. In other words, the correct moral laws are disseminated immediately from the beginning. It would have been 40,000 BC, not 800 BC, but we would also possibly see the universe actually designed to be moral. We would have justice laws, stewardship of the world, enacting justice and mercy on God through God.
That's why the Creator
we see
is
none of
in
these
us.
things. All of the things you would expect from a moral engineer are not there.
See, it's in us.
But we observe no such laws built into the universe, no stewards or law enforcers but us, ever.
It's in us.
So the theistic theory is completely refuted. Its predictions for history do not come true. It's falsified by history itself. Whereas the predictions of atheism are completely verified.
It's bullshit. The other shit.
So the moral argument goes the other way around.
No.
So that's for morals.
No.
Now I'm going to talk about things, whether they're moral or not, but they're still involve moral concern. Yeah, what ought you do after you wipe your butt? You wash your hands, right? Okay. Everybody knows this. Except Jesus.
No.
By the way. In Mark 7, Jesus comments on the Jewish tradition at the time of washing your hands and washing your utensils before you use them for meals and washing your hands before you eat.
We had to live there.
And Jesus says this is a human tradition. It's not in the Torah. God did not command it. Therefore, you don't have to do it. You do not have to follow this rule. He says that things that go into your mouth can't harm you. Only things that come out of your mouth are evil. And meaning words, of course, but and blasphemies. But the point being is that he clearly did not know about germs.
It's been a flip-flop.
This is the best teaching moment in the history of the human race, where if you're a divine being, the one thing you know, if you stumbled across a TARDIS and were able to teleport, in time back to here, and people mistook you for a god and were listening to you, what was one of the first things you tell them about is germs, right? Because there's millions of people, kids, women, men, are dying and suffering in horrible ways because they don't know about germs. And simple things, simple hygiene, just cleaning your hands could save countless lives. And you have this guy, Jesus, who's portrayed as going around randomly healing this or that individual isolated person, but doesn't do anything like cholera.
No.
Done. Gone.
No.
If it was a god, you could eliminate cholera as easily as laying on hands on the earth, right? Just no more cholera, done. That would be how God would. He wouldn't walk around.
Because he done went to school, he done read all the books and all the other shit that I went into
the key thing here is that if Jesus was God or had any type of God, surely he would know about germs and would teach and say, by the way, that is a tradition of men, but it's a really good one. It'll save lots of lives. In fact, you should do this more. And you should sterilize your instruments if you're going to engage in surgery. There's all kinds of things that you should know about. And by the way, water should be potable. You should make sure it doesn't have germs in it and so on and so forth. And clean your hands after you wipe your butt.
Please.
But instead, Jesus seems to act like diseases are caused by demons inhabiting a person. In other words, he acts like the same primitive mindset of the time.
For the bullshit that's going on.
Here we have conclusive evidence just in the Gospels themselves. Even if you treat them as literal books, Jesus is not God, because God would know about germs.
No. Assholes.
So clearly God has not been talking to anyone. For all of these is just examples after example after example. There are many more. One could go on. So history proves that God's not been talking. Islam's no different. I mean, I'll briefly just say that the Quran also fails to mention germs, incidentally. So when the angel Gabriel was rambling on and on and on with these surahs to Muhammad, you'd think by the end Muhammad would be pissed off that Gabriel didn't at any time mention germs. I mean, that would be really helpful information. By the way, also, so would the printing press and a few other things. The Quran also endorses slavery, including sex slavery, which, of course, the Old Testament also does. And therefore, the angel Gabriel thought slavery was really cool. Keep up with that. Like Judaism, God's promise of prosperity and superiority over all nations was also refuted by the opposite. I mean, almost all Islamic nations are failed states or economic disasters compared to much of the quote-unquote infidel West, which has all the power and wealth. Now, that doesn't indicate that we're morally better than them, but it does indicate that if we're going to talk about God's helping us out, it looks like our God's doing a better job than theirs. But I want to point out that all of these religions are the same religion. In fact, Christianity and Islam are just Jewish sects. They're all just different sects of the same one religion. They're all resurrection cults because they all teach basically the same thing and just differ on the details. Judaism says the world will one day be dissolved, the dead will be raised, and the loyal will become immortal. Christianity says the world will be dissolved, the dead will be raised, and the loyal will become immortal. Islam says the world will be dissolved, and the dead will be raised, and the loyal will become immortal. It's all the same religion.
Bullshit.
So let's just pick one and analyze it a little more closely. Now, I can't take credit for this, by the way. I'll read it in a moment, but this is a meme that went around on the internet ages ago. Someone else came up with it. They're pretty brilliant because it's spot on. This is the description of Christianity, dead honest. The belief that some cosmic Jewish zombie can make you live forever if you symbolically eat his flesh and telepathically tell him that you accept him as your master so he can remove an evil force from your soul that is present in humanity because a rib woman was convinced by a talking snake to eat from a magical tree. That is literally the Christianity that was being taught in its first, let's say, 1,800 years, almost 2,000 years of Christian history. Totally makes sense, right? Now, a lot of Christians say, well, okay, that sounds a little ridiculous. Okay, so I get you. That's crazy. So we can make this more sensible. And so we came up with a new and improved Christianity where all that Eve stuff, okay, rib woman, stalking snakes, okay, that's all baloney. We'll grant you that. We'll concede you that. But I still have an imaginary friend who magically manipulates the world for me, and he also magically impregnated a woman 2,000 years ago, and she bore him a son who underwent an ancient ritual of blood sacrifice in order to dispel a curse laid upon me, thus ensuring I will be immortal. Footnote, although I've never seen this work for anyone else before. Now, that's completely honest and correct analysis of Christianity, a description of it, and yet it looks absurd when you actually stand out that way. But what if someone came up to you and said that they have an imaginary friend named Zalmoxis, who they insist is really real, and they'll never die, because this ancient demigod cleansed their soul with blood magic, which grants them the power of living forever in a magical place no one can see. That actually existed. That was the description of the Zalmoxis cult, which is attested in Herodotus, as I mentioned, 500 years before Christianity. So if Zalmoxis cult is ridiculous, Christianity is ridiculous, because it's just the Jewish version of the same religion.
The thing that you did when you did it from your heart, which is the
go to history more recent. Heaven's Gate cult. The Heaven's Gate cult was in California, and they committed suicide, mass suicide, believing that their souls, or the information in their brains would be teleported into a spaceship. They thought they'd get new bodies in this alien spaceship that was flying by the Earth at the time. And yet this whole belief, this idea that when they die that they'll be resurrected in new superior bodies, that's the Christian belief. This is just the scientific version of Christianity. So you have them saying that they'll get new bodies in an alien spaceship flying by, versus what the Christians say is that they'll get new bodies in a magical alternative universe. The weird thing is that the Heaven's Gate cult makes more sense, right? Because, in point of fact, they're talking about quantum teleportation and neural engineering, which are actual things that exist. We almost have the technology now. We can see how to build this technology within 50 to 100 years. We'll have it. It'll be a simple matter to simply copy a brain and rebuild it in another man-made body. All of that stuff is technology that's within human reach and within human understanding. So their idea actually made sense. It really could have been a flying saucer flying by. And if there was, those aliens probably could have scanned their brains and reproduced them in new, superior synthetic bodies on the ship. It's entirely possible. But let's compare this with what the Christians are saying. The Christians are saying not that. They're saying that God needs blood to fix the universe, but only his own had enough magical power to do it, so he gave himself a body and then killed it. Now when you look at it like this, Christians are talking about voodoo and magic and stuff. They're not talking about anything that even has plausibility. The Heaven's Gate cult is actually more believable than Christianity. So if the Heaven's Gate cult is absurd, Christianity is absurd. So, okay, that all looks bad. But the usual thing is, can't we fix the plot holes with elaborate explanations? And I've misspelled explanations, I see here. Excanations? I was hoping there'd be a joke in there somewhere, but there isn't. Can't we make excuses? But the thing is, if we have to make excuses, regardless of what they are,
that's the one I'm
and our
working on.
excuses have no evidence for them, and they don't, because that's why we're making them up, right, on the spot.
Listen to me,
and those excuses are very improbable, and they typically are, like having an excuse not to mention to your own devoted believers for thousands of years that they shouldn't be keeping slaves.
Which makes it so
if your excuses are very improbable, then your theory is very improbable. If you have to use an improbable excuse to tack that onto your theory, the improbability of that excuse then attaches to the theory, right? So the theory becomes as improbable as your excuse, or actually more improbable, because if you have multiple excuses, those improbabilities multiply, right? And those of you who know how to do basic probability math, basic multiplying of probabilities, you'll notice that this probability gets smaller, smaller, smaller exponentially.
I was afraid of dying. But I died for
and the fact still is that God has never communicated any essential scientific knowledge, ever. No germ theory of disease is in the Quran, in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, for example, nor anything else that's
not to the left,
like
not to the right.
God has also never communicated any essential moral knowledge. For example, he completely dropped the ball on slavery. God has never even communicated any consistent religious knowledge of any kind, despite claims going on for 40,000 years, all these different religions. No consistency whatsoever. So these facts remain, no matter what excuses you make for them. And these three facts are exactly what you'd expect if there are no gods, but they're not at all what you expect if there are gods. Okay, so maybe we can grant that. What if God is a total douchebag then, right?
Don't nobody.
Can't there be one of those? And at least then maybe, yeah, he doesn't care about germs or slaves. Maybe, yeah, he's totally pro-slavery. He wants us to die of diseases. He's a total awful asshole. Okay, well, but he could still exist, right? So you really haven't refuted God yet. So there's really two possible kinds of douchebag gods. The one is natural beings, which are aliens, computers, and things like that. We could be living in the Matrix right now, and the douchebag gods could be our AI agents or whatever. But we're going to rule that out because that requires positing two improbable universes to explain one of them. So that leaves us with the other kind of douchebag god, which is the supernatural being, a being that has irreducibly mental powers, a sort of brainless, bodiless, ghost mind that can just will things into existence. There are two hypotheses then left. The God hypothesis, which is that the universe was designed by a ghost even to produce life. The godless hypothesis, that the universe was not designed to produce life. And the first thing you look at is when you compare these two hypotheses is that we've done this comparison before, again and again and again. The explanation of lightning, the explanation of disease. Jesus thought it was demons. It actually turned out to be germs. And on and on and on. We have constant millions and millions of examples of where supernatural explanations were proffered and they turned out to be false, and natural explanations turned out to be true instead. Now, when you have a horse that wins every single one of a million races, and you have another horse that loses every single one of a million races, and they're about to go head-to-head in another race, which horse do you bet on? It's kind of a no-brainer conclusion, right? So even from the start, before I even continue, I could fold this and walk off stage and I'd be done, right? There's no probable basis for believing in any gods, even douchebag gods. But I'm going to go on because it's funny. Now, unfortunately, my animations aren't working, so I'll talk you through this slide. This is the history of life, right? So we've got 2.4 billion years. Life began, and then there were about 2.4 billion years after that, where life was just sitting around evolving as single-celled life. Now, in actual fact, single-celled life is over 6 times more evolved than plants and animals just by time alone, right? Animals have only been around about 0.6 billion years, in other words, 600 million years, whereas single-celled life has been around 3.7 billion years, so about 6 times more. So single-celled life, bacteria, for example, have been evolving 6 times more and longer than we have. So they're actually way more evolved than we are. But in fact, the rate of evolution for single-celled life is actually 500,000 times faster than for multi-celled life like animals, which means that single-celled life is actually many billions of times more evolved than your hand, for example. So single-celled life is badass. That makes a lot of sense in terms of evolutionary theory, but it makes no sense in terms of God. God really likes bacteria. I mean, he's spending most of his time working on those suckers, but very little of his time working on us. So what was God doing for the 2.4 billion years, fiddling around? He's got all these single-celled organisms. He doesn't know what to do with them. He can't even figure out that maybe they could work together to do something. And then eventually he comes up with the idea that, you know what, maybe they could congregate together and make more complex entities, like algae. Algae, that's clever. So he creates things like algae where multiple cells can cooperate, but he's still sticking around with those for 1 billion years before he realizes, oh, you know what, maybe I should have these cells differentiate their function so that we can have a more complex animal. Yeah, I didn't think about that 3.4 billion years
Fuck
ago.
y'all and y'all bullshit.
Still couldn't figure it out, but eventually did. He comes up with this differentiation of cells within a multicellular organism about 0.6 billion years ago. But then it takes him 500 million years to figure out apes. Just apes, right? So he's tinkering around with mice and bugs and all kinds of this stuff, but now it takes him a while to go, apes, oh right, maybe I should do something with those. And then even when he gets to apes, it takes him 4 million years more of tinkering before he figures out how to make people. What was he doing for 4 million years? God, these apes are really stupid. Why can't I fix them? They should be smarter than this. Oh right, maybe I should do something with the brain. I don't know. When you look at this, you realize that this is exactly what we should expect if life is a natural product of random evolution. It would obviously take billions and billions of years for us to evolve. Obviously, single-celled life would have to evolve vastly longer in order to develop the intercellular machinery and complexity to actually start engaging in cooperation. And obviously, once you have cells engaging in cooperation, it would take a very, very long time for them to evolve the sophisticated machinery that would allow them to start differentiating tissues and therefore creating what we recognize as plants and animals. So this is exactly what we expect if there's no God. It makes no freaking sense if there is a God. Even a douchebag God would be more time efficient than this.
Of life.
So what does the godless hypothesis predict? This is what we would expect to see. If we are alive, if we exist, and there is no God, and the universe therefore had to have come about by random chance or whatever, what would we expect to observe? What could we predict about the universe we find ourselves in? The moment we open the door and look outside, what would we see? What we would see is that almost all of the universe will be lethal to life, right? If you pick random universes, you're going to get one that, you know, if it's a universe that's completely hostile to life, obviously that you're never going to be in that universe, right? Because if you're alive, you're not in that universe. So you would never observe that universe. The probability of that being outside when you open the door is 0%. But if the universe is randomly picked from among all the possible universes that could just by chance maybe produce life, then what you're going to see outside that door, if it's not been intelligently designed, is a universe that's almost entirely lethal to life, but life is just a very small, very rare occasional outproduct of it. Now, because we know, in this case, if life is not engineered, if it's not intelligently designed, it has to be an extremely improbable chemical accident. The right chemistry has to come together just the right way. So we know that's a cat. We have to concede that. That's true. If there's no God designing things, there's no designer, that's the only way life could come about. But we also know from probability theory that extremely improbable events almost always occur only in vast spaces and time scales. In other words, if an event is 1 billion to 1 against, but you have 1 billion events, right? So the odds of you having one of those events is actually quite high. So what you would expect to see outside that door is a really enormous number of failed attempts to create life and just one or a few random successes. Because that's what you would normally appear to see if there's no design. But that's what we notice, right? This is what we look at. We look outside that door. What we see is a universe that trudged along for 10 billion years before life began on Earth. We see there are trillions of galaxies, with billions of stars each, and many planets and moons on average per star. And that's just the part of the universe we can see, by the way. The universe is actually predicted to be many times larger than even the part we can see, so that trillions is probably a low estimate, a very low estimate of galaxies. And we notice that single-celled life, like I pointed out, evolved for 2 billion years before multicellular life arose from it. All of these things that we expect to see if life is a product of random chance and not a product of design, we could have predicted that without even knowing it before we looked outside the door. But it gets worse than that. When you look at the universe and map and catalog what's in it, 99.99999% of the universe is a lethal radiation-filled vacuum. Think about that. That's almost the entirety of the universe. It's a tiny little bit that is not a lethal radiation-filled vacuum. So God really, really likes lethal radiation-filled vacuums if he's the designer. But it gets worse than that, because once you erase all of that, and let's just focus on the stuff. Okay, there's very little stuff. It's almost all deadly space. But what's left, let's look at that. We just look at the material. 99.999999% of all the material in the universe composes stars and black holes on which nothing can live, right? Think about that. Like, most of the matter in the universe is dedicated to these gigantic things called stars and black holes that are vastly huger than planets. All that mass, and they are exactly the one place where life is not going to be found. They're incredibly lethal and hostile to life. You can't live there. And And then, okay, so set aside all of that and let's look at the tiny little crumbs that remain. 99.99999% of all the other material in the universe, space dust, asteroids, planets, moons, is barren of life or inhospitable to life. That's an extremely bizarre thing to observe for an intelligently designed universe that's supposed to be custom built to make life, right? This is actually the opposite of what we would expect then. But this is exactly what we'd expect to see the moment we open the door if there is no God, because the only universe we could be in is one like this.
No.
Or at least the probability is extremely high. That's what we'd see. Now I want you to think about this in terms of scale. Imagine this house I've got up here. Now imagine this house contains the entire universe that we know about, the entire known universe. The amount of volume in this house that would be hospitable to life, the rest of it is completely entirely lethal to life. The amount of volume that would be hospitable to life would be smaller than a single proton. Not smaller than a bacterium, even smaller than the proton in an atom in a bacterium. If you walked into that house, you see that it's almost entirely lethal to life, and you couldn't even find the one proton that life was living on in there. Would you conclude that the house was designed to create life or designed to be hospitable to life? No, you'd conclude the opposite. Now, it's worth pointing out that Aristotle actually thought the universe was much more conducive to life than this, and he described it a complete cosmos. In going all the way to the stars, it was completely inhabited and completely inhabitable. Aristotle's universe was 10 to the power of 30 times more hospitable to life than ours is, which means Aristotle is a vastly better engineer of universes than God would be, apparently. Maybe I think even a douchebag God could outdo Aristotle, but evidently not. So the results. We cannot predict any distinct features of this universe on the God hypothesis. Almost all the distinct features of it are unexpected. To the contrary, the God hypothesis predicts very different observations should be made. But we can successfully predict numerous very weird features of this universe, its vast size and its incredible lethality and all of that, on the godless hypothesis. In fact, the probability that the universe would look like this, the way I've described it, is 100% expected. It's exactly the universe we should expect to see the moment we look out the door.
I always make you do good.
Now, so then what they'll come up with is, well, but fine-tuning is so improbable.
Everything.
And the universe requires fine-tuning.
To it being a problem. Without violence.
The problem is that their God requires more fine-tuning.
Everything has a solution.
In fact, they're proposing, first of all, they're proposing something we have no evidence of, a brainless mind, a mind without a body. We have no evidence that that's even a possible thing. So they're already off the rails from the start. But even if we grant them that, what they're proposing is that there is a mind that just happens to exist for no reason, that is at least as complex as a human mind, because he has to be at least as intelligent as a human and have at least as much knowledge as a human. In reality, of course, their God, they're imagining, is vastly greater than that and therefore vastly more complex. But if you're going to pick random soulless or random bodiless minds out of a grab bag of all logically possible bodiless minds, and you want to get something that's human intelligent or better, you're going to have to get information specificity equivalent to human or better. And in fact, information specificity, the complexity of human intelligence, is in the vicinity of 10 to the power of 5 billion. So think about that, 10 to the power of 5 billion. That's extraordinarily unlikely. In other words, the attributes required for a creator are extraordinarily improbable attributes to have. Theology thus posits an even greater coincidence than a random universe. They want to explain a mildly finely tuned universe by positing a massively finely tuned God, and not explaining where that fine-tuning came from. And maybe they'll go to gods all the way down, like the turtle argument, but I think that's a losing way to go, and you know they won't go there.
I go straight to what
So here's the summary. No moral God is likely to exist on present evidence. Quite clearly, only very improbable excuses can rescue God from that. No supernatural causes or communications have ever been discovered, but millions of natural ones have. Excuses make no difference to the resulting probability. And the universe is contrary to predictions of any likely God hypothesis. Only improbable excuses make it fit. And the universe is exactly what is predicted by the godless hypothesis. Even really weird predictions come true. And that's the state of things, and that's where we get from science and history. So we could write Ulan Khulufit's book long before he actually is supposed to have written it, according to Douglas Adams.
And all these people that write these books, read books that someone else wrote to make them.
Thank you.
I can't read or write. So when I write my motherfucking book, it's gonna show you that the truth is the fucking truth, because it's coming straight from the creator of us.
We're gonna open up the floor to questions, and I'm gonna exercise my right as the host to ask the first one. And what I'd like to ask is that, sorry, I understand what you're saying about Christianity and other religions.
Yeah.
What would your position on the existence of God be?
What?
As opposed to separating religion from God.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And I expect I know what the answer is.
Well, yes, of course. That was
put it out there.
The second half of my talk was about douchebag gods. Those are all the gods that no one would worship because he's so awful and doesn't care about anything. So that's the second half of that, showing that even those gods, even gods outside of religion, even gods that don't care what you believe in or any of that, we have no evidence or reason to believe those gods. Instead, the universe looks exactly like it should look if there is no God, and therefore we should go where the evidence leads on that.
Right. Okay. Excellent.
So one creator. Period. All the rest of that shit
for questions, just put your hand up there. I'll come rushing out there and put the microphone in your face, and you can ask your questions away. Right. And so let's have a show of hands. Who wants to ask a question?
I can't see you, so he'll find you.
Yeah. Oh, here we got a question right back here. Do you want to state your name and give us your question?
My name is Greg, and the question is this Zoroastrianism that you begin speaking about, and now everything else is borrowed from that. I suspect most of the audience here agrees with you that that's mostly made-up nonsense that goes back 40,000 years. I know you're not a psychologist, but how do you make sense of so many believers ignoring all of the evidence you've presented here today?
Oh, yeah. Well,
and coming to a conclusion that it's reasonable.
This brings up a topic that came up at the brunch earlier today. There's an entry at Wikipedia. Go to Wikipedia and type in list of cognitive biases. And a massive list. And a lot of them have dedicated pages that you can link through to read about. The human brain, I'm just going to put it bluntly, is totally fucked up. It has not evolved very intelligently. It makes a lot of cognitive mistakes very easily. And in fact, you have to develop very sophisticated cultural technology as a giant software patch to fix it, and that software patch often doesn't work, and not everyone is installing it. And that's what science and reason and logic and mathematics are. I'll just give you one example. Now, mind you, the list of cognitive biases, and all of them can have a tendency to enhance or maintain ridiculous beliefs. But I'll pick one that's particularly talked about by a lot of scholars of religion, which is agency over...
I'm listening to you, and I'm going to touch you on the shit. You don't know the shit.
Black or white, you deserve to have more choice. You deserve to do things your way. The new Moto G6 generation was designed for you, for the creative you. For you who push boundaries. For the smart you, because you know that the best things in life don't always cost more. The new Moto G6. Hello, you.
That's the beginning of the phone. They're more. That's the beginning of the phone. They want to
the over-detection. The idea is, and I mean this has been tested scientifically, but the idea is that we evolved to be agency detectors. It's valuable for us to know when there's a particular agency that's chasing after us, or is an intelligence that we have to thwart or appease or work with. So, for example, if you're walking in the woods and you hear rustling in the grass, and you assume, or you just assume that it's the wind, but it's really a predator, you die. You get subtracted from the gene pool. But if you're walking through the forest and you hear rustling and you assume that it's a predator, but it's really just the wind, the cost is very low. You survive, but you the time and energy, very little cost to that. So that in fact we have evolved a tendency to over-detect agency. That's why we human religions all throughout cultures in history, in earliest times of history, were animistic. Everything had souls. Trees had minds, and the wind had a mind. And you could have a stick that had a mind. this was this kind of idea of agency over detection. It was very easily done. As we evolved civilizations and city-states, then the idea of these animistic spirits became congregated into, taking a bunch of different gods and just saying, oh, it's all just one god. So you have, the wind god or the city god and so forth. So that you had what we call polytheism. Now, as political structures became more monocratic, where you have you start having empires, single individuals ruling over empires, you get monotheistic religions. Zoroastrianism is bitheistic in the sense it has two gods, but it really has only one god you're supposed to worship, so it's monolatric. So it is really the original monotheistic cult. And Egypt tried to experiment with this as well. Rome did a little bit later. But even when you subordinate the other gods, you have the one supreme god under them, or above them. And then the next step is to have them all be agents of his, so they become angels and saints and stuff like that. They still have godlike powers, and they're still basically gods, but we just conveniently don't call them that. So you can look at it politically, what people have done, and they've just kept their animistic tendencies, but they've just aggregated all the animism and thrown it onto one single mind now. So when people say they believe in God, they're still saying they believe in tree spirits and sky spirits and wind spirits. It's all the same spirit to them. And they literally do that. Like you have Pat Robertson saying that gay people caused God to send us hurricanes in the United States. That's just animistic wind godism. So that's just one example. There are many other cognitive biases that contribute to this, but that's my answer to that question.
Excellent answer. Do we have any more questions? Yep. There's a couple of questions out there. Excellent.
He's responding to our monkey asses.
So given that our origins have animistic kind of animistic heritage,
and I know that motherfucker
and the
works.
software bug that we kind of bugs that we've all inherited in our brains through evolution. How do you explain that some people refuse to kind of fall into that, like us sitting in this room? How is it that we don't have and shape those same beliefs, even though we were raised and immersed in this from the same influences as somebody who's deeply religious?
Yeah. This is actually an important psychological question. It's only recently, like within the last 10 years, that scientists have started asking that question and building research tools to answer it. Phil Zuckerman, I think it was Zuckerman, created the Institute for Secular Studies at the Claremont University, where their whole mission there is to actually answer questions like that by starting to study how do skeptics differ from believers? Is it cultural? Is it psychological? And was it biological? And so there are roots to all of these things. Some people have different tendencies. Some people are born with cognitive biases that are stronger than other people due to random genetic variation. That's part of it. We know, for example, from twin studies that biology explains about 50% of your religious belief. So there is a strong biological component. But the other component is cultural, and that depends on how you've been raised. It depends on what information you've been exposed to. It depends on your education and so on. A lot of the people here, for example, are probably highly curious people, that there may be a genetic component to your curiosity. Once you start getting curious, and that means you're going to start asking questions, and you're going to start gaining information and learning things that other people don't. People who are less curious aren't going to follow down that path and aren't going to accumulate that knowledge, for example. And that's just one single change that you can make in someone that can make a difference in terms of where they end up in terms of religious belief. And when they do things like twin studies, they can look at, for example, how when the twins don't have the same religious belief, they can look at, well, then what were the differences in terms of environment? Because then it's not genetic, it's something environmental, and then it's just a question of what parents did they have? How were they abused or treated as children? There's a lot of different aspects of this in terms of psychology. Religion has culturally built itself to be self-perpetuating in many ways. I was just a couple days ago, just last night, watching Jesus Camp, right? So this is an extreme example, but nevertheless an example of how you can so fuck up someone's brain that they'll be stuck in religion and they'll be extremely immune to the software patches that you need to install to get them out of that. And that's just a cultural thing that's just forcing that on them and distorting their brains and doing them real, actual psychological harm as a result. That's just one example of many different influences like that. So the answer to that question is multivariate, and it's still something that we're studying in terms of what we can actually do to answer that question. But it's going to come down to probably a lot of different causes like that. Okay, we have another question.
Yeah, excellent. We've got a question over here, and then I'll come over and ask you a question over there.
So my question is, do you think that with all the software patches and things that we would need to do with people, is possibly convincing historians in general and scholarly work that gods are made up and that the Bible is made up and some of your other work. Is that a good way to deconvert people, or is that possibly going to go against what a lot of people would be willing to accept?
Well, I know already for a fact. I mean, I've traveled the country and traveled North America, Canada, and the U.S. for about 10 years now. And I've been in many rooms with anywhere from 50 to hundreds of people at a time. And many, many times I've asked the question, how many of you were hardcore believers? Now you're not a believer. Lots of hands come up. And then you ask them, was it people like me communicating things that, doing what you're talking about, disseminating the truth and counteracting lies and misinformation and things, was that responsible, at least in part, for their deconversion? And the hands stay up. Largely. So we know that happens. And I've had many people tell me their personal stories, like how my writing an article against God, saying that God is ridiculous and this is why, really made them think and convinced them that, you're right, this is ridiculous, and they got out of it. So we know that works. Now, the way it works is, in general, is if you do that kind of thing, you do information dissemination, you do debunking and all of that, you will get a certain percentage of the population to wake up. But then you have the remaining percentage that might be immune to that particular process. And then there might be some other process that will work on them. And there's a variety of different things you could think of in terms of how you might get them out of religion. Some of them is just letting them die off and just trying to make sure their kids don't get brainwashed or abused into believing the same thing. But each particular technique might, siphon off a percentage until you get down to people who are just full-on actually clinically insane. And there really is no treatment for them other than actual traditional medical treatments and clinical treatments. And that you get maybe like a 5 or 10% of the population where they're schizophrenic or something like that. So I think that's the answer to your question is yes, it works. It works on a significant percentage, so it's going to get us numbers. But then that doesn't, you still have the other percentage that are going to be immune to that, and you have to figure out strategies for how you're going to marginalize them or get them to start seeing reason and start acting rational, thinking, having information and thinking correctly. I mean, so you have to come up with other strategies. And there are a variety of people who are coming up with those strategies and proposing them.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Richard. I've got another question right over here.
Do you think the argument that was originally proposed by Sigmund Freud, that the reason why people subscribe to such irrational beliefs is because they fear their own death, is the main contributing factor to people continuously clinging to those irrational beliefs?
I'm not sure. It's unlikely, because I know lots of hardcore believers that for them the belief in the afterlife was a source of great anxiety for them, because they were constantly afraid that they would go to hell, and that they actually felt much better once they realized, oh, death, I just died, I ceased to exist, that's so much better. So I've talked to a lot of ex-evangelicals who've told me that, for example. So it isn't always that. But I do know people who say that was like the last thing that kept them in. So I would say that lots of people stick to religion for a lot of different reasons. And sometimes they stick to religion for a number of reasons simultaneously, and you knock them off one by one until they all fall, right? So for some people, that would be the case. For some people, that's not the case. And in terms of percentages, you'd have to do a more concentrated psychological study to find out, for how many people is that the case. So we don't really know, but it is more complex than just that.
Richard? Got another question right here. If you still got time to ask some more questions?
What time are we at? So,
quarter to four right now.
Okay, and how long did we want to go? I mean,
you want to go to 4 o'clock? Is that too long?
Sure. No, not at all.
Okay, let's do for 4 o'clock.
Okay,
all right.
Okay. A while ago, I read In the Shadow of the Sword, which is about the origins of Islam, and a good deal of it sounds like the sort of analysis you did of Judaism, Christianity, taking stuff from the already existing religions. Mm-hmm. Have you read that?
No, I haven't, no. And I'm not an Islamic studies expert either, so there's very little I can comment on usually on that.
All right, do we have any more questions? Oh, there's a couple back here. Let's go back here. Hang on.
Hello, good afternoon. The God helmet, have you heard or read anything about it?
Oh, you mean the device that makes you experience God?
Yes.
Is that what you're referring to? I haven't kept up the reading on that. I think that got challenged. I think there's been a challenge in the literature to whether the original study was fully kosher or not. So I don't know if that actually holds up. Pun not intended, but I will claim it after the fact is intended. So I'm not really sure how that holds up in terms of the research, but in principle, we do know that there are centers of the brain that if you activate them in a certain way, that you'll have certain experiences that are bizarre. Certain experiences that can make you feel like there's a presence near you, for example. Because we know that there's parts of our brain that's what their job is, right? Is to figure out that there's someone behind us and we need to turn around, or that we're in the presence of someone. And so all you have to do, you can literally stick a physical wire into the brain and stimulate that thing. You don't need the electromagnetic helmet necessarily. And do that. So there's lots of things like out-of-body experiences that you can do. You can do the powerful feeling of being loved. Because we know our brain already has the architecture for a powerful feeling of being loved, because otherwise we would never be able to feel that. So if you can actually stimulate that and then make people think that it's being stimulated by something like, oh, God is near you, rather than, oh, there's a wire stuck in the right part of your brain, then yeah, obviously you can manipulate the brain to actually have goddess experiences. When I actually was never a fundamentalist. I was never really a Christian in any real sense. My only fanatical religion, I would say, the only thing that I truly believed in was Taoism for several years of my life. And it was because I was convinced by powerful religious experiences that convinced me that the Taoism was the one true religion, and the Tao was something that actually existed, and you could actually conform your life to it, and it would actually make your life better if you did. And the most powerful of these experiences I had was an altered state of consciousness. And I did this through meditation originally, but I got to the point where I no longer needed to meditate to put myself in these states. And so I got to that point where I could do it at any time. And there was one occasion, and I'm going to give you the backstory so a lot of you who know science will immediately know what was really going on. I found that out later, but so I was a flight deck firefighter in the United States Coast Guard long ago. And so I was on, and due to the nature of life at sea in the military, you often have overlapping duty schedules that prevent you from sleeping. So I was awake for about 36 hours just working on various projects on the ship simply because of these duty schedules. Now, occasionally I'd get like a half an hour nap here and there in that period, but never really any sleep. So this is massive sleep deprivation. So 36 hours, and this was common, by the way. It wasn't unusual. And at this time, we just happened to be at sea. We just happened to have a search and rescue mission where the helicopter was just sent away so that everybody could return to the regular stations. And I was there. One of the things I was doing was there holding a fire extinguisher for a particular operation going on. But that was all done, and so I could put the fire extinguisher away or whatever. And everybody was packing up and leaving the air section of the ship. But at that point, we were at sea in international waters, hundreds of miles from land. And we were it was a perfectly clear sky, so we were underneath one of the most amazing star fields you'll ever see. And I immediately had one of these powerful mystical experiences where my mind expanded to encompass the entire universe, so that I was actually merging with all these stars in the universe. And I experienced the actual visual, literally like vertical visual sense and understanding that there were a lot of these little green points throughout this universe that had living civilizations on them, and all of this was in harmony with the Tao, and it was this whole like powerful, moving experience of feeling so at harmony with this idea, and it was so right, and it was all just the perfection of the Tao. It really made sense of everything. So that was an example of a really powerful altered state of consciousness I had, which just gives you the point that you can have these altered states of consciousness that aren't even focused on any particular god. They might be focused on something that's sort of a vegetable mind-like being, like the Tao, for instance. And so, obviously, what that was a sleep deprivation hallucination, right? And when I started to realize that, as I kept studying science, in conjunction with realizing that there were flaws in the philosophy, because I was studying Confucianism as well, and Taoism and Confucianism are arguments against each other, and sometimes the Confucians are right, and sometimes the Taoists are right. I started to realize this was all man-made, and that I was just fooling myself through motivated belief into making these altered states of consciousness, these hallucinations, match what I expected to be the case. So my brain was just generating them, and it was generating them in exactly the way I expected them to generate, and therefore it was verification bias in the most spectacular sense. So even if there was a machine that could do that, that's all it's really doing is something like that.
Excellent. Got another question for you here, Richard.
Hi.
No dejes que las agruras, acidez e indigestión te roben el momento y te hagan sentir pesado. Las burbujas de sal de uvas picot te levantan para seguir disfrutando. Sal de uvas picot, el antiácido para todos.
So, in the description of a God who could have told mankind about germs earlier, again, the benevolent God. Mm-hmm. So, I think I'm correct in saying it was Louis Pasteur.
Pasteur.
Right, my French isn't that good. So, it wasn't until the late 19th century. So, is it possible, like when you did your study of Christianity in the Old Testament, they had these rules? You made a reference of Mark chapter 1, so that would be New Testament. But Old Testament, there's rules like cleanliness, laws. So there's mankind being given rules to govern the way they gather in community to protect against something that they don't fully understand yet until the late 19th century.
The only problem is that those rules aren't in the Bible, right? That was all Jesus' point, was that they aren't in the Bible. They were invented later by Jewish communities later, and probably, possibly under influence from, for example, the Roman civilization, which had a much better concept of hygiene than the Jews originally had. So these ideas were not in the Bible. They were not communicated by God in that way. And so they were man-made. That was Jesus' whole argument, right? But in addition to that, the rituals that they were talking about are completely insufficient, right? So there's lots of different things you should be doing if you understand the germ theory of disease. Just washing your hands is not really sufficient. It's better than not doing it, right? But it would be even better to do it with soap, for example. No one ever thought of soap until the Germans invented soap, and then the Romans thought that was a cool idea and then borrowed it from them. But this actually, the introduction of soap into civilizations post-dates Christianity. So even the idea of soap didn't exist. The idea of sterilizing medical instruments, the idea of maintaining potable water, actually getting diseases out of water, for example, didn't occur to them, wasn't communicated to them. So what we're seeing here is just man-made struggling, floundering around with different ideas, not really understanding what's going on. Whereas a person who actually went back there and understood this stuff could explain to them in specific detail exactly what germs are and how to kill them and how to avoid them. And then you would see more pervasive behaviors of avoiding them, like we see today. Now, of course, that's just communication. That's just if you're just all you can do is talk. God could, of course, simply disintegrate all the germs. So there really isn't even reason for there to be germs if there's a benevolent God. So even just the existence of germs isn't a refutation of the existence of a benevolent God. But then you have the douchebag God. But then maybe the douchebag God wants you to die from germs and therefore won't tell you about them. So.
Excellent, Richard. Actually, this gentleman kind of wants to rebut just a little bit on this. This will probably just open up the conversation and make it a little bit more interesting even.
Sure. So you're saying that in Jesus' reference to how you should live cleanly was a New Testament reference. So you're talking about Roman time period, but Levitical law and Numbers, that's where the reference of how you should take care of your clothes if it gets some uncleanliness in it, or don't touch dead animals. So we're talking about something that predates your Roman reference.
Yeah, but those are actually ritual cleanliness rules. So there are things like you shouldn't touch a woman for many days after she has her period, which is massively ignorant, right? It has nothing whatsoever to do with avoiding germs or disease. Women don't become diseased when they start having their period. And also even they had the idea that even just touching a tomb would communicate disease, which is not true at all. Touching a tombstone is not going to give you a disease. So these are ideas of their notion of what was ritual and purity was leading them to do this. And these are primitive, non-scientific and pseudoscientific ideas.
All right, excellent, Richard. I'm just going to give this gentleman one chance to just kind of make his last statement, then I'm going to move on to other questions. All right?
Oh, sure.
Well, you look like you wanted to say it.
Well, I already figured that I was given the time out.
Okay. Oh, not for me.
Okay.
No.
All right, excellent. Okay, do I have any more questions out there? Yeah, all right. Okay. Hang on for a second, Helen.
Hi, Richard. Thank you. My concern is children. And with regard to your quotation, religion has built in ways to be self-perpetuating. What would be your best intervention to help children? There's so many homeschools, charter schools, private schools. have you got any suggestions on how we can get rid of the adults and help the children?
Excellent question.
Yeah. I mean, most fundamentally, what we need to do is make sure that critical thinking skills are taught in schools. Now, there's a problem with this. At least I can speak to the American experience. Every time people tried to get critical thinking taught in schools, conservatives would get a hold of it, fuck it up, and then it wouldn't work. And then it's TC, it doesn't work. So let's stop talking about teaching critical thinking skills in school. This is what, of course, the Republicans do in our country all the time, is they have a really great bill, they fuck it up, then it doesn't work, and then they say, you see, these things don't work, so let's not even talk about them anymore. They deliberately sabotage these things. So it's really hard to do. But when I talk about critical thinking, I mean the kind of stuff that is taught, for example, at the Center for Applied Rationality, CFAR. You can look this up online. The Center for Applied Rationality is what they do is they teach courses predominantly, for example, for business people, because businesses, corporations want to make good decisions, so they send their people to this company to learn how to make good decisions, right? These are the kinds of things that we should be teaching our kids, exactly what they're doing there. And what they teach them is they teach them all that stuff. I said that list of cognitive biases earlier. They actually teach all of that stuff to these people and say, these are all the ways your brain is built to fail, and these are all the steps you can take to counteract those things. So it's like one big, perfectly designed software patch system. And they also teach things like Bayesian reasoning. They teach logic. They teach you how to reason and how to question and how to test claims. And it's a lot of what they do and how to compare different possible claims. And they teach a lot of different things that if you knew them, you would be very much inoculated against any kind of religion. And it wouldn't be 100% effective, but it would be very effective in terms of percentage of people that would be affected by it. So that's the kind of thing that we should be teaching in high schools, for example, or even maybe as much as we can in earlier grades. And I think when you get that, and because you see it naturally, you see people often talk about how the internet is ending religion in a sense. The internet is the biggest enemy of religion because religion can't lie anymore, right? If some parent tells their kids something like, if you have sex, you're gonna get a sexually transmitted disease, or you're gonna get pregnant, or something like that, and they know tons of kids that are having sex and have neither things happen to them, they know their parents are lying, right? But even with the internet, if they make some religious claim, they can immediately Google it, and they can see that there's a lot of people questioning that claim, or the facts don't line up with it. And once they are willing to realize that their parents just lied to them, not only are they on the track for getting away from religion, but now they know that their parents are liars, right? So now their parents have actually discredited their own authority, so they actually lose their ability to influence a child in terms of convincing them of things, because now they know to be suspicious of everything they say and to double check it. And there are a lot of kids that get to that point on their own, right? Critical thinking skills would get as many kids as possible already doing that. I'm going to fact check what you just told me, and what you just told me is not true. So the more kids that actually act that way and have that attitude and are trained to do it well, the less religion we're going to see in the world.
Excellent, Richard. Excellent. Let's do one more question, and then let's move on to the book signing.
Very good.
I'm kind of frustrated, I guess, as a layman, because it's really hard to research ancient history.
Mm-hmm.
I know you must have put in many, many years and a lot of hours. And I know that you did a lot of research looking into the historicity of Jesus.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, what does that research look like? Like, what is it that you actually do? Do you read old books and ancient languages? And like, what is it?
I do. I actually teach a whole course on this. I teach online courses for a group called the Partners for Secular Activism. And I teach this online course once a month. It's $59 to take each course. There are many other instructors teaching many other subjects. And I teach one course a month, a different thing, and every year I recycle the main ones. One of them is the historical methodology for lay people, right? So it's like teaching people, like, this is what historians do, and this is what you can do, even if you're not a historian, to fact-check historical claims. So if you're really interested in that, you can take that course. The brief summary to answer your question is we look at all the information that's available. A lot of that involves looking at what past scholars have looked at and looking at what they've written about it. And I have to do that in multiple languages. So a lot of the stuff I rely on is not just English scholarship, but scholarship in French and in German. So I have to be able to read French and German articles. I can peck my way through Spanish and Italian articles, for example. But so that's part of it. And then the other part is you have to look at the earliest sources we have, which is the ancient materials that have survived, the ancient texts. And that's complicated because you could, and I have done on occasion, actually go look at a manuscript, like an ancient papyrus or a medieval manuscript or something. But most of that work's already been done for us, where someone has looked at all the different versions of a text and then compiled a critical edition that we can go look at, and they'll have, like the ancient Greek written there, and it'll have on the bottom all the variant readings, because all the manuscripts disagree, right? So they'll have all the variant readings, and so you know, like, what variations there are and so on. So you have to go through all of that, read the original language in Latin or Greek, and see what it originally said, and then look at context and find information that way, and then try to tie connections together through all of that. And then for the book on the historicity of Jesus, I also looked into anthropology and psychology, because there's psychology of ancient religions, psychology of modern religions, but it applies to ancient religions, and anthropology of religion and so on. So I had to study all of this stuff and tie it all together, and then present a case based on that. And it's hard work. It takes a lot of time and a lot of training to be able to do that, which is what the PhD is for. It teaches you to know how to do all of this stuff. And I see my role in the atheist community is doing that so you don't have to. So that's kind of my role, is to get all that, do all that work, and then disseminate all the findings as clearly and as honestly as possible to all of you, so that you can make use of it. And by citing all of my sources for all of my information, you can make even more use of it. You don't have to just trust me as an authority on stuff. So that's kind of like what I do, and I'm happy to be doing that for you.
Excellent, excellent. Fascinating work, Richard. Let's give Richard a round of applause. Thank you very much.
When you look at the horizon, what do you see? The sky and its limit? Or a chance to go beyond? You see, horizons aren't just points on a map. They're frontiers in our thinking, the edge of what we know, and our greatest opportunity. As an airline, we believe in bringing people together, and that it's strange to be apart. That's why we've continued to soar beyond boundaries and expectations, opening new doors and being welcomed around the world in 18 new destinations, redefining the series of the Q-Suite, the world first, and our exclusive business class, and earning more than 50 awards, including the world's best for the 4th time. We're all on this journey together. Yep. And together we are stronger. So let's go beyond the horizon for a world that looks different to this one. Because when we do, there's no limit to how far we can go. Qatar Airways, going closer together.
It's very draining. Another violent game.
Ancient Aliens is an American television series which premiered on April 20th, 2010 on the History Channel. The program presents the so-called ancient astronaut theory, which is the idea that extraterrestrials visited the Earth in the ancient past, and that historical texts, archaeological records, and various legends contain evidence of this contact. I used to believe that the ancient astronaut theory was true. I spent years learning about it from the popular authors, from video presentations and radio shows. I was an enthusiastic promoter of this idea with my friends and family. Although I no longer feel that way, I want you to know that I have no personal reasons to reject this theory. My current worldview could easily accommodate the existence of extraterrestrials. I hope you will come away from this film, even if you disagree with it, saying that I fairly reviewed the claims of ancient aliens without bias and with respect. I hope to show you that this is not a matter of ancient aliens getting a few details wrong here and there, and their main premise remaining true. That is not an option in my opinion. I hope to demonstrate to you that they alone, not on some, but on every single point where they assert an ancient astronaut theory to explain evidence. And that often they are using deceptive means to do this, and sometimes even fabricating evidence to make their points, as we will see. I would also like the viewer to know that unlike many skeptics of the ancient astronaut theory, I actually concede that something out of the ordinary could have occurred in the ancient past, and that there are certain consistent themes in ancient mythologies and the like that require good explanations. But I think you will quickly see that the ancient astronaut theories do not explain this evidence. You will notice a number that appears periodically on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen throughout this film. This number will appear when I am making a claim that requires a reference in order to back it up, and it will correspond to a number on the companion website, ancientaliensdebunked.com. This film is divided into 3 main sections, and each topic can be viewed independently at the website if you choose. I will occasionally be joined by commentary from Dr. Michael Heiser, one of the few actual scholars who has been willing to interact with the ancient astronaut theory. Dr. Heiser has been one of the most articulate proponents of the skeptical viewpoint of this theory, and has written papers and books, as well as almost a dozen websites on the issues we will be covering in this film. We're happy to have him as a part of this film, and we're happy to have you, the viewer, here as well. I encourage you to have an open mind and enjoy the film.
Pumapunku is so unique in the way that it was constructed and shaped and positioned that it is the most intriguing ancient site on the planet.
While the pyramids at Giza are incredible feat of achievement, compared to Pumapunku, the pyramids are child's play. In my opinion, the most significant piece of evidence that we have in this entire ancient astronaut puzzle is Pumapunku in the highlands of Bolivia.
Well, if Pumapunku is considered such good evidence for the ancient astronaut theory, we should probably start off by looking at it. After all, it's the one that they say was built directly by extraterrestrials.
Pumapunku is the only site on planet Earth that, in my opinion, was built directly by extraterrestrials.
Ancient Aliens starts off with a false dilemma by making people think that it was absolutely impossible for ancient people to construct Pumapunku, even to the point of making outright false claims.
One of the most intriguing things there is that the stones that were used there aren't sandstone, they're granite and diorite. The only stone that's harder than diorite is diamond. So the only way that this could have been achieved is if the tools were tipped with diamonds.
This is funny because it's totally wrong. The stones are not granite or diorite at Pumapunku. They are red sandstone and andesite. But this is also funny because of the way that he says it.
The stones that were used there aren't sandstone, they're granite and diorite.
Well, yeah, actually, it is sandstone. You can't blame him, though. It becomes obvious that throughout the series, he often just repeats things he's heard in Eric von Daniken's books. Von Daniken's books are what the Ancient Aliens series is based on. Later, we see Eric von Daniken himself make the exact same, totally wrong claim.
Of course made out of stones found on Earth, because you don't transport granite or diorite from another solar system.
Von Daniken continues building up this false dilemma.
One of these platforms is 800 tons.
This is very incorrect. The heaviest block at Pumapunku is 130 tons, and most of the stones are much smaller than that. So he's off by a whopping 670 tons. Unfortunately, we will come to expect this kind of thing from Von Daniken as we progress. Ancient Aliens spends quite a lot of time pointing out the various features in the stone masonry at Pumapunku, and then declaring it impossible to do without power tools.
Each of these small drill holes are basically evenly spaced along this routed groove. To me, it's clearly power tools have been used on this unusual block of stone here.
Well, exactly. This surface is as smooth as the tabletop, like in your kitchen. There's no wave to it or anything. This was machined.
The sandstone and andesite stones at Pumapunku would have been easily worked with the most basic stoneworking tools. The idea that diamond-tipped power saws were needed is ridiculous. The red sandstone was relatively soft and easy to work with, and even though andesite is pretty hard, because of the way it cooled, it could easily be flaked off using stones as soft as 5.5 on the Mohs scale. Such pounding stones were found all over the andesite quarries in the area. Contrary to Ancient Aliens' claims that archaeologists are baffled by Pumapunku, archaeologists know the basics about how Pumapunku stones were cut and shaped. This is partly because there is evidence for this all over the site itself. They actually used a method that almost all ancient stoneworkers used. They used hard pounding stones to pound out trough-like depressions. Later on, they used flat stones and sand to grind the stone to make a polished surface. We will see later on that this is also how the Egyptians, thousands of years before this, made their flat-surfaced granite monuments like obelisks. Sand, as we will see later when we look at Egypt, has extremely hard particles in it, and if placed between a flat surface and a rock, can polish even the hardest stones known to man. In fact, the harder the stone is, the better it can be polished using sand. We will also see how sand can turn a piece of copper into a very efficient granite saw or granite drill, a method which the Egyptians utilized quite well. Some stones at Pumapunku that Ancient Aliens would never show the cameras are the ones that are in the middle of this process. They show that at the same time a stone was being pounded by stone hammers, which created these trough-like depressions, the grinding and polishing was taking place on the other end of the stone. Unfinished stones like this one clearly show how they were shaped, and it wasn't with lasers. There's also unmistakable evidence of stone hammers having been used in places that were never meant to be visible, like where certain stones would be connected with one another. And because of that, it's hard for me to believe Eric von Daniken in this next clip, because it would mean that the alien toolbox had a laser gun right next to a stone hammer.
Extraterrestrials arrive, the spaceship stands in orbit. Only a smaller space vehicle comes down like a space shuttle. So, just to protect their instruments, they make overnight, with their technology, what we call a base camp. Of course made out of stones found on Earth, because you don't transport granite or diorite from another solar system. And then they disappear. But the wall of their base camp is still there.
It is true that stone tools would not be enough to construct Pumapunku, especially for some of the finer points. For that, they would need metal chisels and the equivalent of a carpenter's screw. Entire studies have been done detailing how these cuts were made, and nothing spectacular is required except some metal tools like chisels. The arguments against this are usually either that a particular culture did not yet know how to cast metals, or that copper chisels would have been too weak. On the first point, we know that the pre-Incan Andean culture was very skilled at fashioning metals and creating metal alloys. In fact, the people who built Pumapunku were even pouring copper alloys into molds right on site, showing that they had more than enough capability to form all kinds of metal tools. But the question is, what about the tool's strength? Well, even if they were pouring pure copper into a mold, it would still work, but it would need sharpening often. But because archaeologists actually found a few of these metal cramps used by them on site, we now know that they were using a very strong copper, arsenic, nickel alloy, which made a much stronger final product. Arsenic acts as a deoxidant, preventing the metal from becoming too brittle, and nickel was used in copper alloys specifically to make strong chisels. Once you understand that they had the ability to make strong metal tools in a huge variety of shapes, there is no part of Pumapunku stonework that would have been too difficult for them. Well, what about these 90-degree right angles that ancient aliens make so much about?
One of the amazing things here at Pumapunku is the precision of the blocks. You can see with this block of granite that it's really been cut at very accurate right angles.
To make flat surfaces with right angles, you don't need alien technology. You only need a square or a simple equivalent. It's important to keep in mind that Pumapunku would have been built thousands of years after the Egyptians, who had all kinds of squares and plumb bobs and levels and so on. It's a pretty basic stoneworking tool. That being said, despite what Ancient Aliens says, Pumapunku is not all perfect right angles. You can even see this, ironically enough, as the Ancient Aliens crew goes around with carpenter squares. You can see that some of them are simply not squares. Also, they make claims like all the H blocks are the same dimensions, which they say suggests that they were made by a big machine. But not only would that not be the only conclusion if it were true, it's not even true. The dimensions of the H blocks are not all the same, though they are close. It's probably the case that they were made using the same plans. Speaking of plans,
mainstream archaeologists say that Pumapunku was built by the Aymara Indians, and we would all have to agree that in order to build something like Pumapunku, you need writing, you need planning, and you need some sort of a idea where which piece goes and how it ultimately all fits together. But there is one thing that all the mainstream archaeologists agree upon, that the Aymara didn't have any writing. So how is it possible that they built all of this without plans?
The builders of Pumapunku may not have had an alphabet, but they did use the common iconography or artwork of their culture called Yayamama. All the icons on the site are Yayamama, not secret alien code, and this is but one of the many indications of the culture and time that it was built. But my point is that like many cultures, they used pictures instead of an alphabet. And most building plans are done through pictures, like blueprints, for example. So saying that no alphabet means no planning is pretty ridiculous in my opinion. Well, what about moving the stones and lifting them into place? Surely that would have required levitation.
How these massive blocks of granite were moved from their quarries and brought here to Pumapunku would have required some kind of super technology. Levitation and anti-gravity, huge lifting vehicles, something that ancient aliens would have had.
If they did know how to levitate these stones, then they put far too much effort into creating places in the stones to attach ropes to. Many stones at Pumapunku have grooves several centimeters in width and depth on two adjacent faces for holding ropes. They even had special places cut into the stones that Pumapunku scholars call hoisting grips. All very strange things to do if they could simply levitate these blocks. And to make matters worse for the ancient astronaut theory here, according to archaeologist Jean-Pierre Pratson, who is an expert on Pumapunku, there is almost no stone at the Pumapunku site that does not have what he calls drag marks on one of its faces, where it has been, well, dragged to the site. Ancient Aliens throws up another false dilemma here.
What nobody talks about is the irrefutable fact that we are at an altitude of 12,800 feet, which means we are above the natural tree line. No trees ever grew in that area, meaning no trees were cut down in order to use wooden rollers. The wooden roller theory falls by the wayside.
This is like saying that there's no way that the Egyptians used wood because trees didn't grow in Egypt, which is true. The difference is that while the Egyptians had to import wood from places like Lebanon, It would have been far easier for those at Pumapunku to solve this problem. All they would have had to do is simply walk down the hill a little bit. Okay, well, what about this claim?
Logic does not exist at Pumapunku because there we have megalithic structures which just lie about this entire site as if ripped apart by some sort of great force.
I propose that logic still exists at Pumapunku, and that the scattered state of the complex can easily be explained. Quoting from archaeologist Alexei Branich, quote, "The high quality of the stones made it attractive building material for houses, churches, plazas, bridges, even railways." In other words, the stones were pulled down and hauled off by locals for building material. In fact, we have the 400-year-old writings of a visitor to Pumapunku who said that the looting was in full swing even back then. He wrote that if the site was closer to town, he didn't think there would have been any stones left at all. Ancient Alien says that Pumapunku is 17,000 years old. This is what Branich said of this claim. Quote, "The idea that Tiwanaku is 14,000 years old is based on a rather faulty study done in 1926. Since then, there has been a huge quantity of work, both on the archaeology and the geology of the area, and all data indicates that Tiwanaku existed from around AD 300 to 500. For more information on the faulty study he's referring to here, I will quote at length from Jason Colavito, who has been debunking ancient astronaut theories for years in his books and blogs. He said the following about this claim. Quote, "Tiwanaku is not 17,000 years old. This date derives from the work of Arthur Poznansky, who tried to apply archaeoastronomy to the site, but did so in ways that modern scholars do not recognize as legitimate. Poznansky proposed a date of 15,000 BP, before present, i.e. 13,000 BCE, which the geniuses on Ancient Aliens misread as 15,000 BCE, adding an extra 2,000 years onto Poznansky's already flawed dates. Here's what he did wrong. Poznansky assumed that the Kalasasaya temple at Tiwanaku was laid out with perfect accuracy to align to the equinoxes and solstices that he felt but could not prove were important to the Tiwanaku people. Thus, on a certain day, the sun was supposed to rise above one rock at the temple and set behind another. Ah, but which rock should we choose? Since the current ruins do not align with these celestial events accurately, he concluded that the ruins must have been built at a time when they would have aligned with that event. Since the sun and sky change positions at a predictable rate due to the gradual changes in the angle of the Earth's axis, he concluded that the Kalasasaya temple was built in 13,000 BCE as a solar observatory, despite no other evidence of solar astronomy at the site. The long and the short of it is that Poznansky assumed celestial alignment and assumed flawless construction, and then used his assumptions to prove that his assumptions were correct. Colavito also has this picture of the site with the caption, "Pick a rock, any rock, one of them must align with something." This site has been dated using a huge variety of methods, things like carbon dating, the type of metals they used, the debris found in certain places, the type of iconography they used. Literally every kind of dating method applied comes to the same conclusion. It was constructed in the early Middle Ages. Before we conclude this section on Pumapunku, there are two other claims I wanted to address.
The Spanish conqueror asked the Inca, the people living there, including the king of the Inca, "What is this Pumapunku?" And they all said, "It's not us. It's not our forefather who made this. This were made by the gods in one single night." Usually a king is proud about what his people did, about the precision and so on. In that case, the chief and the people said, "No, it was not us. It was the gods who made it."
If you understand a little about the Incan imperial system and religion, you will understand why the Incans didn't claim the site, and even why they claimed that it had a supernatural origin. Part of the Incan state religion was that the Incan Empire was the first civilization, and it was created by God himself. It was a very convenient idea for bolstering the Incan case for the right to rule everyone else. When the Incans arrived at Pumapunku, the site had already been abandoned for at least 100 years. Admitting that there was a pre-Incan culture at all, let alone one with more skill than them, would have been detrimental to the whole scheme. So they slightly modified their already existing mythology to include Pumapunku. So instead of Viracocha creating the Incan capital, he also created Pumapunku. And just like that, the Incans were still the oldest and greatest civilization, even though everyone probably knew it wasn't true. And finally, Ancient Aliens says the following about what the ancient local people believed regarding who constructed Pumapunku.
Local legends suggest that Tiahuanaco was built as a site of religious pilgrimage to celebrate the arrival of sky gods.
But this is a total lie. Viracocha came from the sea, not from the sky. This is a very sneaky move by Ancient Aliens, in my opinion. So, in conclusion, the stones are not made of granite and diorite. The stones were easily workable with the tools available to the Andean culture. Tools which we know included high-quality metal alloy chisels. These tools would have been more than sufficient to make the angles seen at Pumapunku. The faces of the rocks have been finished using a polishing technique after being rough cut using stone hammers, evidenced by the unfinished stones and hidden areas of the finished stones. The moving of the stones was not as difficult as Ancient Aliens makes it seem, especially when you take into account that they are telling people that the stones weigh 600 tons more than they actually do. The stones have telltale drag marks and hoisting holes for ropes, all showing that they were not levitated as Ancient Aliens would have us believe. We know the culture which built this monument, and all the iconography and sculptures are consistent with that culture, and the various methods of dating that scientists use all point to the same time period. The idea that Pumapunku was from Atlantean time, we now know is based on a very transparently flawed presupposition.
Perhaps the most familiar and most mysterious megalithic structure in all the world is the Great Pyramid of Giza. The enormous size and weight of the stones, multiplied by the sheer number of them, makes one thing certain. The construction of the Great Pyramid remains one of the greatest marvels and mysteries of architectural engineering.
The pyramids at Giza are marvels of engineering, and there are many theories about how they were constructed, from the mundane to the fantastic.
There are all kinds of theories on how the Great Pyramid of Giza was built. So many theories, you just sit back and shake your head. And that includes ET visitations, levitating the blocks with some kind of sound system.
One place we can learn a lot about Egyptian stone-cutting methods is from the so-called unfinished obelisk. Here we have a 1,000-ton obelisk made of granite, which was abandoned midway through the project because of a crack that developed. This stone, because it is unfinished, gives us direct insight into how they cut and shaped granite as well as other stones. On the sides we can see how these stones were separated from the quarry. A team of workers would line up side by side and pound their sections with a diorite pounding stone. Such pounding stones can be found all over this and other quarries in Egypt. This pounding only broke off millimeters of granite at a time, but eventually these trough-like sections emerged at each worker's station. After that, they would do the same thing on the bottom of the block, until it was supported only by a thin spine in the middle. Then it would be snapped off using levers. The people who created the Moai statues at Easter Island used very similar methods for quarrying stone, as did many other groups around the world, as we will see. After the stones had been roughly shaped using pounding stones, they would then begin to polish them with grinders. There have been many types of stone grinders or polishers found in ancient Egypt. They usually had a handle with a flat surface, which they would use to rub against the stone with sand as the abrasive. They were, well, sanding the stone. The various mineral particles found in sand are hard enough not only to polish hard stones like granite, but also to do what Ancient Aliens tries to make people think is utterly impossible. That is, to cut granite. The Egyptians had a variety of ways to cut granite, mostly involving copper and sand. There are plenty of saw marks on granite stones in Egypt, at the granite quarries, of course, as well as certain notable ones, like the famous granite sarcophagus in the Great Pyramid. the person who was doing the sawing on the sarcophagus sawed for a while at the wrong angle before realizing his mistake and going in the right direction, which left a pretty big mark for us to study. These copper saws came in three basic styles. One was a two-person saw, like an old-time lumber saw. Another type was a small, handheld saw with a wooden handle. And finally, there was a tubular saw for making holes in granite and other stones. These saws are depicted in several Egyptian reliefs. Interestingly, they didn't require saw teeth to work. They only required sand to be placed between the saw and the stones. The sand was what did the cutting. This particular method of stone cutting has been tested by ancient Egyptian tool experts. And not only was it done, but it was apparently quite easy to do. However, sawing granite with copper was expensive because the copper would wear out somewhat quickly. Therefore, you mostly see granite in ancient Egypt being worked with pounding stones, finished with grinders and chisels. The saw work was reserved primarily for royal projects, like that of the sarcophagus. All of this really makes Ancient Aliens lose credibility, because all throughout the series, they make it sound like working with granite was only possible using diamond-tipped alien power tools. But as all this relates to the Great Pyramid's construction, it's important to remember that almost none of the pyramid is made from granite, except for a few things like the roof supports for the king's chamber. Most of the stone was sandstone and limestone. About 85% of the stone used in the construction of the pyramids was relatively soft sandstone, which was quarried right on site. That's right, the Great Pyramid was built right in the middle of a massive sandstone quarry, which was no doubt at least one factor in choosing the location to build it. The other 15% of the stones, like that of limestone and granite, would have to be brought in from a slightly further away location. So this raises another question. What about moving these stones? Surely the only way is by levitation, as Ancient Aliens claim.
In order to really move massive amounts of stone like that, they would have had to have them levitate, somehow made weightless, and then just moved through the air by some kind of device, perhaps even a handheld kind of device, like some beam weapon.
If levitation was the way that the ancient Egyptians moved stones, they had a funny way of showing it, because there are plenty of depictions of them using wooden sleds to move everything from blocks the size and shape of the ones used for the pyramid to massive 1,000-ton monuments and obelisks, all using wooden sleds. They even had a hieroglyph for the word sled, which they used often. In fact, 3 such sleds have been found intact by archaeologists, and they have all kinds of places to attach ropes to. Speaking of ropes made out of papyrus and other materials have been found in Egypt, some of them with a massive circumference, suggesting that they were used for extremely heavy objects. Boats were used for stones that needed to be imported. In fact, a channel was dug from the Nile to the construction site, so no stone had to be dragged very far anyway. So, what about the construction of the pyramids? How exactly was it done? Part of the reason that the Ancient Aliens perspective is attractive is because some of the other popular theories concerning the pyramid's construction have serious problems, such as the single ramp theory, which would have had to extend out more than a mile and would have had to have more stones in it than the pyramid itself. Another one is the spiral ramp theory. This one is problematic because some of the ledges only had about 2 feet or less to work with, certainly not enough to hold a ledge that would carry workers and stones the size of the ones used. Also, a structure like the pyramid would have had to have been constantly monitored for geometric accuracy as it progressed upwards, because being even a few inches off on a lower level could cause the top to be off by a huge amount. And a spiral ramp would have made it impossible to survey the geometric accuracy of the pyramid as it progressed. Add to this that there's no actual evidence for either of those theories, and you can see why people are looking for alternatives. While doing research for this documentary, I came across a new theory about the pyramid's construction that I had not heard before. At first I planned to mention it only briefly, but the more I heard of this theory, the more convinced I became of its validity. It was proposed not by an Egyptologist, but by an eccentric French architect named Jean-Pierre Houdin. And if Jean-Pierre is correct, knowing how the blocks were raised in the pyramid also happens to explain some of the other mysteries, like the purpose for the odd-shaped grand gallery, as well as the purpose of the granite blocks above the king's chamber, and why there were 3 burial chambers cut at different levels in the pyramid, 2 of which were unused. I will very briefly explain this theory, but I highly encourage you to visit the links at the website on your screen, because the specifics of this theory are something that any pyramid enthusiast should be very familiar with, in my opinion. The basic idea is that there was an internal ramp in the Great Pyramid, and workers dragged the blocks through it until they reached the corners, at which point the block was repositioned for another team to pull up the next ramp. Also, the exterior limestone blocks with the polished finish would have been positioned and aligned first to ensure geometric accuracy, and then the sandstone blocks would have been positioned behind them as filler. This would mean that all the internal chambers, like the Queen and King's chamber, were built as the pyramid progressed upwards in the light of day. This internal ramp theory, unlike some of the others, is actually supported by quite a lot of physical evidence. For example, in the 1980s, a French team, looking for hidden chambers, conducted a full-scale gravimetric survey of the Great Pyramid, kind of like a giant X-ray map of the entire pyramid. They actually found evidence of this internal ramp through their study. They had no idea what to think of the spiral pattern they saw at the time, so they simply filed it away until they heard about Jean-Pierre's internal ramp theory 14 years later. In addition, there is this notch high up on the Great Pyramid, which, according to Jean-Pierre, rests exactly on the 7% grade where you would expect to find the internal ramp, and would be at the exact place where the workers would have lifted the blocks and changed the direction for the pullers. Bob Breyer, an Egyptologist who was working with Jean-Pierre, was only allowed a few minutes to survey this notch and take a few pictures and measurements. They found that there was indeed a large space behind these stones, and they made extensive computer models with the pictures that were taken. As of 2012, the team is still waiting for clearance from the Egyptian authorities to conduct a full-scale survey of this notch. But perhaps even more interesting than this is the purpose for the Grand Gallery and the granite stones above the King's Chamber. I mention them together because, according to Jean-Pierre, they are intimately connected. First, it's important to know the main difference between the Great Pyramid and the other 2 pyramids at Giza is that the Great Pyramid's burial chamber was inside the pyramid. The other 2 were underground, cut directly into the bedrock, which meant that in those 2 pyramids, they did not have to worry about the hundreds of thousands of tons of stone above it collapsing onto the tomb. The Great Pyramid was different. Its chambers were in the middle of the pyramid, and because of this, the designer had to get creative to prevent the stones from collapsing in on the chambers. In earlier pyramids in the area, this had been accomplished using a stone roof that came together at an apex, which distributed the weight of the blocks away from the chamber. But for the Great Pyramid, the designer wanted to be more ornate, opting for a flat roof in the King's Chamber, which would have easily collapsed if he didn't find a way to distribute the weight of the stones above it away from the roof. He ingeniously added a series of large granite blocks, spaced out evenly above the chamber, capping those stones with the same apex roof idea from the earlier pyramids, which distributed the weight safely away from the King's Chamber ceiling. This did indeed solve the problem of the weight of the stones collapsing the chamber, but it caused another problem. How could you get those granite stones up there for placement? They would have been too big for the internal ramp, and too heavy even at a 7% incline. For the solution, we look to the Grand Gallery. The Grand Gallery has puzzled Egyptologists ever since it was discovered. It's such an odd shape, and it doesn't seem to make sense to construct it the way it's constructed if it's simply a path to get from point A to point B. This has led to much speculation about its purpose. Jean-Pierre has proposed that the Grand Gallery was used as a massive counterweight system, where a wooden trolley was loaded with stones and rigged with ropes, and was used to provide the force to lift the heaviest objects. Basically, it was the equivalent of a freight elevator. There's actually a lot of physical evidence for this too, and it explains all kinds of peculiar details about the Grand Gallery. For example, the odd holes in the so-called benches of the Grand Gallery were used to connect a wooden guide system for the trolley. It also explains why there are remnants of grease as well as scratches along the bottom of the chamber where the trolley would have rubbed against the stone. It was apparently lubricated to make it run smoother. It explains the odd way the stones were worn at the top of the so-called step of the Grand Gallery, exactly where the ropes would have had to be. This area has now been cemented over to make a step, but you can see in the old pictures what it looked like when the first explorers arrived. This freight elevator would have required a small external ramp, which there is some evidence for. And even those who oppose the long, single ramp theory agree that there probably was a small ramp at the beginning of the construction. This ramp would have been dismantled after the completion of the King's Chamber, and the stones would have been dragged up the internal ramp to finish the rest of the pyramid. Jean-Pierre and his team made a lot of converts to this idea, including a number of well-respected Egyptologists and pyramid experts. But as of 2012, they are still in the final stages of being approved by the Egyptian government for more work on the site.
Houdin's idea of an internal ramp, I think, is coherent. I think there's good circumstantial evidence for it. If you have watched the National Geographic special on his view, I think you would agree that there is good circumstantial evidence for it. It has a lot of explanatory power for a lot of the fundamental questions. And I think it's important because Houdin's theory depends on a very simple idea in engineering, both in the ancient world and in today's world, and that is the use of weight and counterweight, using the weight of one object to lift an object of greater weight.
Whether or not this theory proves to be perfectly true in every respect will hopefully soon be seen. But I at least hope that by now, most of us can see that these construction techniques are well within the capability of mankind to conceive of and to do without the intervention of aliens.
Eastern Lebanon, the Bekaa Valley. Here, at this archaeological site, stand the ruins of Heliopolis, built in the 4th century BC by Alexander the Great to honor Zeus. But beneath the Corinthian columns and remnants of both Greek and Roman architecture lie the ruins of a site that is much, much older. According to archaeologists, it dates back nearly 9,000 years. The ancient city of Baalbek, named after the early Canaanite deity Baal.
And so because it was already sacred to the god Baal, then later the Greeks and the Romans then would build temples on this very same spot.
Archaeological surveys have revealed that the enormous stone foundation that lies at the base of the site dates back tens of thousands of years. But even more significant to ancient astronaut theorists is their belief that the colossal stone platform may once have served as a landing pad for space travelers.
The idea that ancient aliens will try to convey is that underneath the Roman ruins lies a very old platform that was once used to launch spacecraft. As we watch the next clip, listen for the first thing they cite as evidence for this claim.
But what was originally there, before the Roman temple, was this spaceport platform that was apparently used for extraterrestrials coming and going on planet Earth.
As evidence, researchers point to the gigantic megalithic stones incorporated into the foundation, each weighing between 800 to 1,200 tons, and perfectly fitted together.
These three stones they're referring to are called the trilithons, and the heaviest of the three is 800 tons, not 1,200 tons as they say. There are two other stones that are heavier than this around the area, but they are unused, still connected to the bedrock in the quarries, and thus are obviously not part of the trilithons. The way the information is presented about these three stones leads the viewer to believe that they are part of the foundation, or platform, of the Baalbek site. What they want the viewer to think is that spacecraft lifted off and landed on the stones of this platform. They also claim that these three stones cannot be of Roman construction, as the mainstream archaeologists believe. They say that they were part of the earliest structure at the Baalbek site, and that the Greeks and Romans only built on top of this ancient foundation. And it is true that there was a very old pre-Roman temple at this site, but we will learn more about that later. Our focus at the moment is the Trilithon stones. Ancient Alien says that these three stones are the real mystery of Baalbek.
This is the real mystery of Baalbek. How these stones came to be there, why they were placed there, and specifically how they were transported into place. Because some of the stones are of such magnitude that modern machinery is incapable of putting them there. But somehow our ancestors were able to do this.
To solve this mystery, we need to first understand that these three stones do not form the foundation of Baalbek, as is so often suggested. The Trilithon stones lay end to end, or longways, and are part of the narrow wall on the western end of the complex. They are most certainly not the foundation, nor do they constitute a platform, and it would be very awkward for a spaceship to land on top of them, considering the space on top is so narrow. Ancient Aliens tries to make it seem like no one knows the purpose for these stones, or why they had to be so heavy.
But if the moving, hoisting, and setting of such massive stones was so incredibly difficult, then who, or what, placed them there? And perhaps more importantly, why?
The truth is that the purpose for this wall is very well known by archaeologists. It was a retaining wall. Retaining wall technology really improved with the Greeks because of the importance of the amphitheater in their culture. Because most amphitheaters were sunken into the ground and surrounded by earth, they needed to construct retaining walls to hold back the soil. Then the Romans came along and basically perfected the practice. The rule of thumb in retaining walls, even today, is the bigger and heavier the stones, the better the retaining wall. Also, the stones needed to be in as big of sections as possible. In other words, huge sections of uncut stone. It's no coincidence that some of the biggest single stones in the ancient world, besides Baalbek, are also used in retaining walls, and by the Romans as well, as we will see. Retaining walls were especially important if there was a lot of soil erosion at the site, or if the platform you were trying to build was on a steep incline. At Baalbek, the platform was built right on the side of a huge hill, so for that reason alone, it would require a retaining wall if they intended to make a large level platform. But if you added to that a soil erosion problem, you would have two very good reasons for a huge retaining wall at Baalbek. So does the area around Baalbek have a problem with soil erosion? The answer is yes, probably one of the biggest in the world. You can see evidence of soil erosion all around the Baalbek site. The soil from the top of the hill has been sliding down the hill into the valley below for hundreds of years. One of the leading causes of soil erosion is deforestation. If an area that once had trees has been completely cleared of those trees, the rain no longer will have anything to slow down its velocity. Normally, the rain hits tree branches and the thick foliage that accumulates on the forest floor over time. Also, the soil is kept in check by the root systems of the trees, which hold the soil in place. Lebanon has a picture of a cedar tree on its flag. Their trees have been a symbol of pride for literally millennia, the so-called cedars of Lebanon. But the forests have disappeared long ago, as they were one of the only sites for timber in the ancient Near East, and it was massively deforested in ancient times. In fact, the soil shifting is just as bad today in the FUCK Valley. The UN in 2006 proposed a series of solutions to deal with this now full-scale environmental disaster in the Baalbek region. Homes in the region are being abandoned as their foundations shift and they become inhabitable. But although these proposed solutions by the UN may be new, this problem is an ancient one the Romans would have been well aware of. The massive Trilithon stones provided the weight needed to press down and secure the stones in the wall below. This is why you only see these huge stones on one side of Baalbek, the side where the steep slope is. The idea that these stones were part of a platform and were used as a landing pad is something that requires ignorance of the layout of the site in order to believe. Well, what about the age of this wall? Is it from the Roman period of construction, or is it from the pre-Roman Canaanite era? There is a lot of confusion about this point because there was indeed a very old pre-Roman temple on this site. The pre-Roman Canaanite temple was a pretty standard platform and altar, much like other sites built by the Canaanites, which were referred to in the Old Testament as high places. The original site was probably chosen by the Canaanites because it was indeed on a hill, as any good high place should be. but also because it was less than half a mile from the perfect stone quarry. The early versions of this temple, however, did not have a retaining wall. As the different groups added to the site over the years, the site changed drastically. The Romans alone spent 200 years doing construction at the site. Think of that. That would be like starting a construction project in 1812 that only just now came to completion. That's a long time to be working on a project. So yes, Baalbek is built on a very old Canaanite altar to Baal. But the Trilithon stones were not part of that site, nor are they part of the foundation as is often claimed. They are part of a very necessary retaining wall. The question still remains, however, about the methods for moving and lifting these stones.
Some have suggested that this stone alone weighs in excess of 1,200 tons. How was it moved there? Because obviously it's situated on top of these stone rows that we can find down here, which means that this stone had to be lifted and then set on top of these stones down here.
So, did the Romans have the technology to move and lift such stones? Well, all you have to do is look one country over to find out. About the same time the Romans were beginning their 200-year project at Baalbek, another project of similar magnitude was beginning by the Roman client king, Herod the Great, in 19 BC. Herod, using Roman techniques, renovated the Temple Mount to earn favor with the Jews, who viewed him as a Roman proxy, not a Jew. The expanded version of the temple was double the size of the original, but in order to make this expansion, he had to incorporate part of the hill to the northeast, which meant that he had to construct a massive retaining wall in order to hold back the force of the earth in order to build a massive platform. There is a portion of this retaining wall still standing today, and it contains the second largest set of single stones next to Baalbek. Just like Baalbek, there are several of these stones lined up to form the wall and to provide the weight and size needed to hold back the earth. They call the four largest stones the master course. The weight of the heaviest one is 630 tons, only a little over 100 tons less than Baalbek's biggest stone. And no one denies that these stones were cut, moved, and lifted to perfection using Roman and local techniques. As a side note, it's tempting to think that the holes visible in these stones were used for lifting, but these holes were cut after the stones were placed. They were used to hold plaster in place for certain water projects and only go a few inches deep. Anyway, is it really logical to believe that the Romans could cut, move, and lift 630-ton blocks for retaining walls just fine? But if you added another 100 tons, it would require alien technology? We know that the Romans, about this same time, had taken a liking to Egyptian obelisks. They started dragging these obelisks back to Rome in large numbers, and Rome was hundreds of miles by land and sea from Egypt, whereas Baalbek was less than a mile from the quarry. Some of these obelisks were almost 500 tons, so the Romans had a lot of opportunities to get good at moving stones about the same size and shape as the Trilithon stone. There are even Roman descriptions of the process of moving obelisks by Marcellinus Comus, as well as reliefs such as the one at the bottom of the Theodosius obelisk in Istanbul. The ancient Roman writings of Marcus Vitruvius Pollio describe in detail many of the Roman technological advantages, like pulleys, which would reduce the force needed by half for each pulley used. He even described their ingenious way of moving stones by constructing huge oak wheels on either end of the block, whether they were round like pillars or huge rectangular stones like the Trilithon. They would then be pulled by oxen to the site. So what about the lifting of the Trilithon stones at Baalbek? Some make the point that the Trilithon stones do not have Lewis holes in them, like many of the other Roman stones at Baalbek. Lewis holes is the name for the holes the Romans would drill in the stones for lifting with their cranes. Yes, the Romans had cranes. And although their cranes only had a 5-ton capacity, often they would combine many of them together, which would obviously give them a greater capacity. So why don't these 3 stones contain these holes, like all the rest of the stones at Baalbek? Well, first of all, I wouldn't be so sure that they don't. No one has ever seen what is on the ends of these stones. It may very well be that they decided against a straight-up or dead lift of the Trilithon stones because of their weight, and instead decided to lift up only one side of the stone. You would really only need to lift it high enough and long enough to get even the smallest brace underneath it, because at that point you would have a number of mechanical advantages for options. For example, watch as this man makes a Stonehenge in his backyard all by himself using a simple counterweight method.
I've tried to do this without any mechanical machinery at all. I've used mostly sticks and stones for my equipment. No pulleys, no hoist, no metal levers. Just try to use gravity too. I believe is my favorite tool.
The first goal is getting this block 3 feet off the ground.
In order to move it up to this point, I just rock the block back and forth, adding weight to that end, and that opens a gap on this side, and then I just slide a board in. Then I add the weight to that end, there you go, and slide a board in on this end.
This shoring box acts like a jack, slowly raising the block.
But it's not really even necessary for them to have been lifted. A French paper written by Jean-Pierre Adam meticulously details how the stones could have been moved using the specifications provided by Marcus Vitruvius Folio by constructing roads underneath the stones on rollers, and the roads were raised to lead to the exact place of their placement, which was easy at Baalbek because of the terrain, so it didn't require any lifting, and then using man-powered drums and a system of capstans to pull the stones along the road. This method would have only required 144 workers to accomplish. It's also helpful for people to remember that the largest stone ever moved in the world is the so-called Thunderstone in Russia, moved in the 1700s using no modern equipment. This stone is 1.5 tons larger than the largest Trilithon stone, and we know that moving it didn't require any alien technology. Well, what about this stone?
What's really interesting about Baalbek is it's always been known as the landing place. There's an actual text from Sumerian times called the Epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh actually claims to have seen rockets descend and ascend from Baalbek, the landing place.
These claims come directly from the writings of Zechariah Sitchin, and they are totally untrue. Baalbek was not called the landing place, and the Epic of Gilgamesh never speaks of rockets ascending and descending anywhere in it.
If you're going to make these assertions, I would want the passage. I want to see the passage in Gilgamesh that names Baalbek specifically. I'm naturally skeptical that there is such a passage, but if you're going to make this claim, you have to be able to establish with certainty, not even just a general region. You have to establish with certainty that these are the stones, that these stones are what is being referred to in any given text.
Sitchin, when making this claim in his book, never tells the reader where they can find this in the Epic of Gilgamesh. This is probably because it makes it harder for the reader to check his facts.
Yeah, I have personally found the writings of Sitchin very frustrating from the perspective of a scholar and academic, which is what I am. It's sort of reflexively what I look for. It's very hard to follow his trail because he just doesn't cite sources. Even if he cites a source, for instance, an ancient text, he doesn't give you sort of the chapter and verse. He doesn't give you the tablet numbers, the line numbers. And I have to look at it and say it's either really lazy or he doesn't want you to be able to check on it. It's one or the other.
I will link the actual section of the Epic as well as a link to the online resources to check the Sumerian text for yourselves at the website ancientaliensdebunked.com. Nowadays, all the Sumerian tablets, including their own dictionaries, are searchable online. Yes, the Sumerians wrote their own extensive and detailed dictionary, so we don't have to trust Sitchin or anyone else. We can basically just ask the Sumerians what they thought a word meant, and it becomes painfully obvious to anyone that cares enough to look that Sitchin was at best totally incompetent as a translator, and at worst, a scam artist. See SitchinIsWrong.com to begin your journey in losing any confidence in the so-called translations of Zechariah Sitchin. In conclusion, the Trilithon stones are part of a necessary retaining wall, not a foundation, and such walls were common to the Greeks and Romans. The retaining wall was not part of the simple, original, much smaller temple of Baalbek, and we know from other retaining walls of similar size, built by the Romans at the same time and in the same area, that they were more than capable of moving and placing stones of that size and shape, also evidenced by their ability to move obelisks. This is especially true if you gave them over 200 years in which to do it. megalithic sites like Machu Picchu all in one segment, because Incan stonemasonry was all done more or less the same way. In regard to Incan building, Ancient Aliens focuses most of its attention on the curved or beveled edges of the stones. They say that it looks like the edges of these stones were melted. Notice as we listen to them build the case for this, that the reason they believe this is true is based entirely on the way the stones look.
There are signs in many of these stones that show very large amounts of thermal heat have been applied to mold in such a way that they fit perfectly, and so it really does raise a lot of questions.
If you look at the style the Sacsayhuaman wall was built, the blocks look as if they've been molded like putty. If you can mold stone into place, then all of a sudden, as crazy as this sounds, it makes more sense.
Now, melting granite or any other stone and reshaping it would leave unmistakable evidence in and on the stones themselves. In other words, if the rocks were melted, it would be easily provable. It would not be a matter of what the stones look like. It would be a simple yes or no question. Ancient Aliens skips this step of proving or disproving their theory. Instead, they assume that the rocks were melted based on the look of the stones and move on to the step of trying to figure out who would have the technology to melt stones.
I have a stone torch which I use for sometimes shaping granite, and I mean it generates a temperature of in excess of 3,000 degrees. 3,000 degrees. That's a lot.
When we look back at the ancients, and we see a technology that they couldn't possibly know, there's only two possibilities. Either God did it, which we really don't think happened, or some high-tech civilization from another planet came and showed them how to do it. That took their materials and tools and went back home.
I think there's at least one more possibility that Mr. Dunn may have missed. Every shaped stone at any Incan site has what archaeologists call pit marks or pit scars. They occur when stone hammers are used to quarry and shape the stone. In addition, archaeologists have found a huge number of Incan stone hammers at the quarries, and almost uniquely to the Incans, they are found at the building sites too, because the Incans only rough cut the stones at the quarries. They did the finish work on site, so the stones would perfectly fit the stones around them. Well, how did the Incans accomplish these beveled edges? They used a smaller gauge stone hammer for the outer section. The evidence for this can be seen on every single stone that has these edges. You can see that the pit scars are much more numerous and smaller on the edges, showing that more blows with a smaller stone was used to achieve the detail work. Another reason that this is no mystery to archaeologists is because there are a large number of stones in various stages of construction in the ancient Incan quarries. These stones reveal that indeed the Incan stonemasons were using some of the most basic tools, even for their time. If you would like to learn more about the details of this, I'll link you to some peer-reviewed papers that can tell you more than you'd ever want to know, including details of experiments. For example, a single scientist in 90 minutes accomplished similar cuts with similar tools. And all of this makes what Dunn says here one of the most off-the-wall things ever said in the Ancient Alien series.
I can't help but think that whoever was behind them thought the process through from beginning to end. They didn't quarry the rock and then decide, how the heck are we going to transport this? They knew from beginning to end what needed to be done with whatever techniques and technology they were going to use. The industry today is kind of an adage, keep it simple, stupid.
Based on his experiments, Mike Dunn believes the simplest way to build the Great Walls of Machu Picchu would have been to transport small rocks to the site, then melt them, and use molds to fashion the exact size and shape needed.
So he says it's more simple to melt the granite, something so complicated that we don't really even know how to do it today. Is that really the most simple solution he could come up with? And then to say that they poured the melted rocks into a mold. I mean, look at these walls. Can anyone look at this and say, yeah, that looks like they were made from the same mold? These are not exactly bricks of the same size and shape. Unless he wants to say that they made a new mold for every block, in which case we would go well out of the range of this being the most simple solution. As far as how the Incans moved the stones into place, they left us a lot of evidence behind in the form of ramps. There are Incan ramps all over the place, still in existence today, in the quarries and at the building sites. The Incans had one of the most massive workforces in all the ancient world. They were like the Roman Empire of the West, and they had an absolutely huge labor force at the ready for these types of projects. So we know these rocks were not melted and put into molds as Ancient Aliens tells us. We actually know exactly how they made these rounded edges because of the pit marks left behind, as well as the huge number of stone hammers found in the quarries. There are no mysteries that require alien input with Incan stonework. Many people are familiar with these images of stone heads, called moai by the locals. Ancient Aliens tells us that nothing is really known about them.
How in the heck did they make these? Where did they come from? And how did they move them? Nobody has the answer.
This isn't true at all. For instance, we know exactly how they were cut and shaped, because the construction of the moai was abandoned abruptly. So there are plenty of examples of moai in various stages of development. Also, the stone tools that they used to pound out the relatively soft volcanic rock were found all over the quarries. Here's a clip of one of the locals explaining to his grandson how the moai were built.
He thinks that 20 people carved this moai over a period of time of 5 to 6 years to this stage. This is our sections of people who were, given as your assignment. This is your section you can carve, and you can see different, ways of doing it, and you can clearly see the talking marks and how the people were carving and going in and make this deep cuts in the rock like this, that.
The channels reached around and eventually formed a boat-like keel until the statue could be snapped off and fully extracted.
Ancient Aliens spends most of its time here discussing the moving of the moai, and it's interesting the angle that they take, because it seems that they are aware that there have been many successful experiments moving moai with wooden sleds and minimal workers. So, Ancient Aliens has to do what they do best, create a false dilemma.
But there is a unique problem with the idea of moving moai with sleds or rollers.
When you go to Easter Island, you don't get the impression they have enough wood to have rollers. And in fact, in the 1700s, the first 4 expeditions to Easter Island never really saw a tree. And so that's the real mystery of Easter Island. How can you move a multi-ton statue if you have no trees for rollers?
So, they say there are currently no trees on Easter Island. Therefore, they assume there were never any trees on Easter Island, and therefore, well, aliens. The problem with this is that there used to be a lot of trees on Easter Island, which we now know because of extensive pollen samples taken from the crater lakes, as well as other methods. In fact, the very reason there are no trees on Easter Island now is probably because they used all of them while moving and lifting over 1,000 moais over hundreds of years. In other words, they used all the trees. One interesting thing about Easter Island is regarding soil erosion. If you take a land that once had a lot of trees and cut them all down, then you will have a massive soil erosion problem. This is because there will be no more root systems to hold the soil in place. Also, the rains no longer have anything to stop their velocity. The soil erosion at Easter Island is so notorious that if you type soil erosion into a search engine, you will see that the Wikipedia page has a picture of Easter Island. Some of the moai actually have full bodies, they're not just heads, but because of soil erosion, even in a very short time, they have been covered up to their necks in soil. This is a direct result of the land being completely deforested. So we know for sure how these moai were cut and shaped, that is, with simple tools which are found all over the quarries. And we know that if they had trees on Easter Island, then there are no problems with moving them and prying them into place. And Easter Island used to have a lot of trees before their fascination with creating moai exhausted their supply.
arguably the most remarkable Mayan artifact ever found, the stone sarcophagus lid of King Pakal has produced considerable controversy. Mainstream scholars believe the depiction is of King Pakal on a journey to the underworld. But ancient astronaut theorists believe the king is portrayed seated at the controls of a spacecraft and have dubbed him the Palenque astronaut.
He appears to be going into space. He's the original rocket man. They're manipulating his spacecraft going into space.
We have maintained for a very long time that the depiction here is of King Pakal sitting in some type of a spacecraft, because he is at an angle like modern-day astronauts upon liftoff. He's manipulating some controls right here. He has some type of breathing apparatus or some type of a telescope in front of his face. His feet are on some type of a pedal. And down here, you have something that looks like an exhaust with flames.
The sarcophagus lid of Pakal has been a centerpiece for the ancient astronaut theories since the beginning. Eric von Däniken believed this to be one of his best pieces of evidence.
You see his upper hand, he's manipulating some control. From the lower hand, he's turning something on. The heel of his left foot is on a kind of pedal, and outside of the capsule, you see a linking flag. This is incredible. This is absolutely a proof for extraterrestrials.
The theory rests on the idea that the Mayans were not depicting their usual symbols here, but were trying to realistically depict a rocket with Pakal as its pilot. I think the best thing I can do for you here is to clearly explain what the Mayanists and other scientists who specialize in Mayan culture and artwork believe this scene is depicting. As Ancient Alien said, archaeologists believe this scene is depicting the moment of Pakal's death and his descent into the underworld. Let me show you why they believe that. The most famous symbol in this picture is that of the World Tree, which, if you believe Ancient Aliens, would make up the entire hull of the rocket. It's hard to overemphasize the importance of the World Tree in Mayan mythology. The idea was that the World Tree extended into the heavens with its branches, and its roots extended into the underworld. So, it was a symbol of the bridge between the underworld, heaven, and earth. When it is depicted, it almost always has the double-headed vision serpent on its branches, just like it is depicted here of Pakal's lid. The vision serpent was believed to live at the center of the world. Thus, it is depicted just above the underworld and just below the heavens. In its top branches is the celestial bird, which is seen a little more clearly in other World Tree depictions like this one. But on Pakal's lid, you can see it's clearly depicting the same bird. The celestial bird represented the heavens, and thus was pictured on top of the World Tree. What Ancient Alien says is the exhaust or fire from the rocket's takeoff is the roots of the World Tree extending into the underworld, which is not just typical for the depictions of the World Tree, it's pretty much a requirement. In the underworld, we see a picture of the Mayan sun monster, which Pakal is riding into the underworld. The idea was that every time the sun set, it was actually traveling into the underworld, where it would die, like everything else in the underworld. You can even see the bottom half of the sun's face was a skeleton, while the top half still had flesh and had not yet died. This, too, is a common theme showing the moment of transition. So Pakal is hitching a ride on the sun into the underworld. Even the so-called smoke is easily explained when you understand Mayan symbols. In Mayan art, whenever you see a so-called traveler, which is a person in transition from one world to the next, there must be something that is making that travel possible. Sometimes it's a twisted umbilical cord, but almost always it's a serpent, often a double-headed serpent. In other words, being in the mouths of double-headed serpents was a symbol of transition from one world to the next. You can see that the so-called smoke is actually the traditional serpent's beard, which appears on almost every depiction of a serpent in Mayan art. Now that you have an idea about what the scholars believe about this, let's look at some of Ancient Alien's specific claims.
He's manipulating some controls right here.
They say his hands are manipulating some controls, but if you look closely, his right hand isn't touching anything at all, and the thing to its right is not connected to the tree any more than any of the other floating design elements in the picture.
His left hand could be said to be manipulating controls more than his right, but you would have to say that all these marks on the tree are controls too, which in reality is probably the bark of the world tree, which was modeled after the ceiba tree, which had a very unique bark and thus was usually depicted in some way or another in world tree art. The odd position of Bacall's hands in this image is really what all the fuss is about. In the 1970s video reputation of the ancient astronaut theories, the Mayan expert in that film made the point that the hands in Mayan art are often depicted in delicate positions.
The Maya like to show hands in position.
Gestures are common in Mayan art. There are similar examples on the side of the slide.
As far as the claim about his foot being on a type of pedal, I would have to say that if that is how aliens design pedals, then we are far more advanced in pedal technology than they are, because that may be the worst angle to put any kind of foot pedal. Plus, there are other reliefs of Mayans in the underworld on similar slabs with their feet in similar positions, but without the rocket. Well, what about this so-called breathing tube for his nose? Well, it doesn't connect to anything. And if you look closely, the thing it could potentially connect to is also represented on the other side of the lid, and is clearly a stylistic element of the vision circle. What it actually is a nose piercing, particularly a bone. Finally, consider the context that we find this image. It's on a coffin lid, so the mainstream view is perfectly in line with that, and the whole concept was common in Mayan burials. It would have been a strange thing for them to all of a sudden abandon their usual symbolic artwork to depict a rocket on a coffin lid. The fact is that the symbols on the sarcophagus lid are really consistently used. Often the symbols are even explained in the extensive Mayan writings. These symbols fit perfectly with what we know about their beliefs about the world and the afterlife. The Nazca lines of Peru have been an important part of the ancient astronaut theory since its beginning. Originally, von Daniken claimed that the lines were kind of UFO runway, or a type of alien airport, where the alien craft landed and took off. When challenged by Carl Sagan and others on this point in an early documentary, von Daniken kind of backtracked on this and said that he meant that the lines were created as a result of the spacecraft landing.
I never said that the extraterrestrials needed a runway or something like this. My idea, which I developed in my second book and also in the book was that some vehicle was coming down, not coming close to last station, a small vehicle, and landing with the rocket, maybe even of the air cushion system. So they don't need landing tracks, but simply by the landing itself, some stones are blown away, and you have a simple track on the ground. And after maybe a few hours or a few days, they start again, maybe in another direction, you have a second track.
In other words, he's saying that the spacecraft dragged on the surface of the ground as they landed, and that the lines are therefore the unintentional result of spacecraft landing. For the Ancient Alien series, however, it seems that they are back to claiming it was an airport.
The lines look like airstrips. They start abruptly, they end abruptly.
Looking at Nazca from the air, it looks like an airport. And it really does, because you have all these bands, wide bands, that look like airstrips that are laid on top of each other, but you also have these gigantic, long, straight lines that go for miles and miles over valleys, over mountains.
Either explanation seems to fall short of explaining why these lines are sometimes several miles long, one of them being almost 15 miles long. It would be a pretty inefficient spacecraft if it took 15 miles for it to take off, or, in the alternate explanation, if it needed to drag on the ground for 15 miles before it stopped. We will look more into this later. In the meantime, I want to look at what I think may be the most ridiculous claim of the entire Ancient Alien series.
At Nazca
Entire mountaintops have been removed. I mean, this all requires machining. And I'm not talking, you know, a little wheelbarrow and a pick. I'm talking sophisticated machinery, because we today would also need sophisticated machinery in order to achieve such feats.
They are claiming that this mountain in the Nazca region has been artificially sheared off. But what they are referring to is a plateau. Plateaus and mesas are naturally flat on top. They occur all over the world, and geologists know exactly how they form. In light of that, it makes them spending so much time on this point kind of funny.
There the mountain's cap runs up from both sides. Here it is flat. This is absolutely incredible. This is one of the most craziest pictures I made about Nazca.
The crazy thing is, the rubble, the remains of that summit or that mountaintop, gone. It's nowhere. It's not in the valley down below. It's nowhere in the region. What happened to it?
Okay, moving on to the lines. Nazca doesn't just have straight lines. There are also several images of animals, such as monkeys, spiders, fish, jaguars, llamas, lizards, and dogs. Contrary to what Ancient Alien says, the way that they were made is very well known. In fact, it's ridiculously simple. They simply move the reddish-brown iron oxide-covered pebbles that cover the surface of the Nazca Desert out of the way. When the gravel is moved, the layer underneath is exposed, which is much lighter, and the contrast of the two colors creates the Nazca line. If you were in the Nazca Desert, you could create a Nazca line by running your finger over the surface of the ground. It would probably stay there for hundreds of years, too, because the Nazca Desert is one of the driest places in the world, and it almost never receives rain. If it did, the lines would have been washed away long ago because they are so superficial. Well, if these lines aren't an alien airport, what are they? What is known are the basic beliefs about religion in the ancient Nazca culture. Likely related to the arid and extreme nature of their environment, Nazca religious beliefs were centered around agriculture and fertility. Much of the Nazca art depicts powerful nature gods, such as the mythical killer whale, the harvesters, and the mythical spotted cat, etc. Essentially, they worshipped gods represented by animals, which they thought controlled things like water and crops. I might add that they were super serious about this too. So serious that they decapitated lots and lots of humans in order to appease these nature gods. I think it's fair to say that the Nazca people were obsessed with beheading. On their pottery, it depicts crops growing from severed heads. And there are other things too that show the connection that they believed severed heads had to good crops. All that to say that these people were dead serious about farming. And if you're serious about farming, you must also be serious about water. And if you were farming in the desert, then it's off the charts how serious about water you would be. I mention this because it helps to explain what the Nazca lines likely are. First, let's take the depictions of animals. For the most part, all of these animals can also be found depicted in Nazcan pottery. They were the Nazca gods of water and fertility. If you asked an ancient Nazcan what they believed about the world and how it worked, they would likely say something like, we take hallucinogenic drugs, we cut off a lot of heads, all in hopes that the monkey spirit will help us have some good crops this year. That just isn't what you would expect to hear if these people were smack dab in the middle of a massive mining operation conducted by UFO flying spacemen. There should be some hint of that in their mythology, if it were true. But if it is true, they apparently couldn't have cared less based on their lack of any indication in their belief system. Moving on to the actual lines. In order to understand these, we need to know a few more